Chapter 267. Deng Ziyu was slightly startled.
He thought to himself on this rainy day, instead of waiting in the bureau for his subordinates to show their filial respect, instead of eating heartily in Xueqi restaurant, instead of going back to his manor to enjoy the warm tea, he insisted on going to Yan Manor in the face of the storm.
He didn't know what he was thinking.
"I'll go get a carriage," he said to Fan Xian in a low voice and prepared to walk to the opposite side of the street.
Fan Xian shook his head and flipped his hand to cover his head with the hood of the raincoat. He was not afraid of the pouring rain outside. Just like this, he walked into the rain on Chong Street, allowing the rain to hit the gray-black clothes on his body. The Overwatch Council's official robes were very common, but there were special styles. For example, when investigating a case on a rainy day, they would often wear this kind of raincoat. The sleeves were wide but not long, and it was all made of waterproof material. There was a one-piece hat on the back. The style was a bit strange. It was like a windbreaker, but also like a cloak. When the rain fell from the sky and landed on this clothing, it would slide down smoothly. Back then, when Xu the scholar first saw this kind of Overwatch Council clothing in Jingdo, he was greatly interested and gave it another name, lotus clothes, using the meaning of rainwater sliding off lotus leaves like pearls. But, after all, the style of this kind of raincoat was a bit strange and did not fit in with the current sense of beauty. So, even with such a wonderful name as lotus clothes, it still did not spread among the people. Only the officials and spies of the Overwatch Council would wear this kind of clothing. So, in the current rainy days in Jingdo, as long as one saw this kind of person wearing a black and gray lotus clothes, everyone would know that the Overwatch Council had come out to do business and would hide like a ghost. Fan Xian walked first into the rain. The people of the Qinian unit did not dare to be negligent. Just like that moonlit night, they split into a few positions and surrounded him at a distance that was neither too far nor too close. They walked forward on the quiet rainy Chong Street. The rain pounded against their clothes, and their long boots stepped on the puddles. Tap, 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 tap. The few people in the mist unexpectedly had a silent and fierce aura. The owner of Xueqi restaurant, who was bowing to send off the guests, raised his head slightly and looked at this scene. He thought to himself that this Commissioner Fan was truly an interesting person. Bringing along a few subordinates, he was able to wear these strange clothes beautifully and walk out with texture. The Yan Manor was not far. After walking for a while in the rain, they turned into a small alley. Once they came out and stood to the right, they could see the manor door, which was not very wide. Thinking of the father and son in this manor, who were in charge of all of the court spy activities, even Fan Xian couldn't help but feel a glimmer of seriousness. Yan Ruahai was an old official who had been in charge of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council for 10 years. He was deeply favored by the emperor, as well as held in high regard by Chen Pingping. Even the 6 ministers of the court did not dare to be too arrogant in front of him. When the Overwatch Council was first set up, the official ranks were set very low. Later on, for the sake of convenience, the emperor basically used the method of bestowing titles to forcibly raise the political status of the Overwatch Council officials. For example, Yan Ruahai had become a second-rank viscount a few years ago. Last year, Yan Bingyun had been betrayed by the eldest princess to Northern Qi. In order to appease the loyal officials of the Overwatch Council, the emperor directly promoted Yan Ruahai's title to a third-rank count. Even Fan Xian's father Fan Jian, who was now the Minister of Revenue, was only a first-rank count. From this, one could see how well the emperor treated the officials of the Overwatch Council. However, there was no new plaque on the door of the Yan Manor. The small title below the Yan Manor still read, Jing Qingzi Manor, instead of Jing Qingzi Manor. The words were also in black instead of gold, making it appear extremely low-key. But Fan Xian knew that other than the officials who had been granted titles, only the officials who had been personally appointed by the emperor had the right to write their titles in front of the manor. From this, it could be seen that the Yan Manor was also bestowed by the emperor. Even if they wanted to be low-key, they could not. Standing at the manor gate, where the rain had yet to stop, the caretaker at the gate had long since seen them arrive. Seeing the raincoats they were wearing, he knew they were officials of the Overwatch Council, but he didn't know if they were colleagues of the master or friends of the young master. He hurriedly descended the steps, using his hand to shield himself from the rain, and welcomed Fan Xian and the others. Fan Xian lifted the rain hat off his head, revealing his slightly wet hair. "Is little Yan home?" he asked. The caretaker was about to say that the master was not home, but hearing the other party speak, he realized they were looking for the young master.
Looking at the handsome face, he had long since guessed who it was. He respectfully said, "The young master is home."
"May I ask if you are the commissioner?" Fan Xian nodded and took off his raincoat, placing it on his forearm. The caretaker hurriedly took it, holding up an oil paper umbrella in his left hand. "Sir, please come in." This was a clever man.
He knew that the young master had returned from the north and had a close relationship with Commissioner Fan, so he took the liberty of not announcing his arrival and welcomed them directly.
Fan Xian had the same idea. He smiled at the caretaker, and very naturally walked into the manor.
After all, his rank was above that of the Yen father and son, so there was no need to be polite under these circumstances.
This was the first time he had come to Yen Manor, and he couldn't help but be curious about the environment of the manor.
But following the caretaker's umbrella, he did not see anything out of the ordinary along the way. There was just enough rain to moisten the surprisingly large fake mountain in the courtyard, making the moss on it seem as if it had returned to its youthful green.
Past the fake mountain was the inner courtyard of Yen Manor. Fan Xian looked at the two people in the distant veranda, listening to the rain, and smiled.
He waved his hand to indicate that no one should follow him, and he slowly stepped on the puddles of water on the stone floor, trying not to make a single sound as he approached the veranda.
The veranda was in the rain, and the stone steps beside the pillars were soaked. Even the ground under the veranda was half wet. But the two people in the veranda remained unmoved. They sat on two chairs and stared blankly at the scene of the autumn rain. One of them was Sir Yen Jr., who had just returned to the capital not long ago. The other was Lady Shen, who had fled thousands of li. The two of them sat on the chairs and did not speak, nor did they look at each other. They only cast their gazes into the rain, as if hoping that the ceaselessly falling rain would weave into a curtain of pearls and reflect their gazes back into each other's eyes. Fan Xian laughed bitterly. He found that Yen Bingyun's face was still a sheet of frost, but there was a gentleness in his eyes. Lady Shen, who was beside him, seemed to have shaken off the misery of the day her family was ruined. There was a slight shyness on her face, but there was an additional trace of confusion in her eyes. But this pair of resentful lovers did not speak, did not look at each other, and acted as if the other did not exist. The scene was a little strange. What made Fan Xian feel even stranger was that Lady Shen was wearing the clothes of a servant girl. Her feet were shackled and dragged by a long chain. The end of the chain was inside the room. It looked like she had been chained up by Yen Bingyun. After watching quietly for a while, Fan Xian sighed in his heart. He knew that Yen Bingyun's mood was not as relaxed as he appeared.
Otherwise, he would have been able to stand behind the two of them for so long without noticing.
So he coughed lightly. Yen Bingyun turned his head and saw that hateful, gentle, smiling face. Anger flared in his eyes. He didn't know if it was because he was angry at being disturbed, or because he wanted to make trouble for Fan Xian because he had been forced to take a captive. Lady Shen saw Fan Xian, but she did not know what to feel. Her face darkened. She rose from the chair, bowed slightly, and entered the room. The clanking of the chains echoed endlessly in the rainy corridor. Yen Bingyun did not seem surprised that Fan Xian had barged into his manor. After inviting him to sit, there was no strange expression on his face. But Fan Xian was a little surprised at how quiet the Yen manor was. He sat in the chair that Lady Shen had left behind, feeling the lingering warmth of the seat. He couldn't help but feel his heart flutter. He forcibly suppressed his untimely and inappropriate thoughts and said, "I had thought that after you went through so much trouble to return to the capital, there would be many officials here to congratulate you. Who would have thought that on this rainy day, there would only be you and Lady Shen looking at each other and crying silently?" Yen Bingyun explained very seriously, "First of all, I did not look at her. I think she did not care to look at me. Second of all, it was the sky that was crying, not me." Fan Xian shrugged his shoulders and said nothing. Yen Bingyun continued, "Father has never liked to interact with officials of the court, and I am not as famous as the commissioner in the capital. Naturally, the manner would be a little quieter." Fan Xian shook his head. "I know that before you went to northern Qi, you were a famous young master in the capital. Now that you have returned home, you will certainly be promoted again. How could those people who want to curry favor with the Yen manor not come knocking? Even if your family is the head of the Overwatch Council and does not belong to the same system as the court officials, I think no one would pass up such a great opportunity." Yen Bingyun's face was expressionless. "Father keeps 3 dogs. They are always tied outside the door,
so no one dares to enter the manor.
Fan Xian was surprised.
He touched his slightly wet hair. Why didn't I see them when I entered the manor? Yan Bingyun said. Today, there was a heavy rain that stopped the guests.
Those big black dogs have been working hard these past few days. Let them rest. Fan Xian was speechless. Sir, what business do you have with your visit today? It was clear that Sir Yan wanted to deliberately keep his distance from this Sir Fan Jr. Presumably, this was a result of his family upbringing. Fan Xian ignored this. He took out the cylinder, opened it, and threw it into Yan Bingyun's lap. Yan Bingyun picked it up and squinted at it. His expression was a bit unnatural. Sir, you really do trust your subordinates. But this is a way for the First Bureau to survive. Showing it to me is already against the rules. Fan Xian looked at him with a smile. Don't think that you can avoid me every day just because you are about to take over your father's position. You call me sir, so you know that even though I am in the First Bureau and you are in the Fourth Bureau, I am still a commissioner. If you really push me too far, I will send out a warrant and have you transferred to the First Bureau. If I demote you, you won't be able to do anything about it. So don't talk so much nonsense. Helping me look at this information is the right thing to do. Yan Bingyun flew into a rage. How can you drag people into your muddy waters? If you use your authority to pressure me again, I will go to the director and reason with him. Fan Xian waved his hand. Looking at the rain outside, he laughed. Say whatever you want. If I do end up bringing you to the First Bureau to be a registrar, don't regret it. Yan Bingyun swallowed the anger in his chest. He pointed at the information and said in a cold voice, What do you want to know? A big question. Fan Xian laughed lightly and stood up. He walked in front of Yan Bingyun and looked at his cold yet beautiful face. I want you to find out for me if there is any connection between the second prince and the Cui family. There was a heavy silence in the corridor. There was no shock or fear on Yan Bingyun's face. He pointed at the cylinder and said, Since we were in Shangjing, I knew you were going to deal with the Cui family. You did not hide this from me. But, the second prince? There has never been any rumor that he has anything to do with Xinyang. He naturally knew that Fan Xian was dealing with the Cui family because of the eldest princess. He was investigating the relationship between the Cui family and the second prince because he wanted to deal with the eldest princess. So he was a bit confused as to why the second prince would be involved. Intuition, Fan Xian said calmly. I did not hide the matter of dealing with Xinyang from the beginning. Because in this matter, there is a natural possibility that you and I will be allies. As for my suspicions of the second prince, it is because I discovered that in the half a year I was in northern Qi, he had been too quiet in the Qing kingdom. Furthermore, it was only recently that I gradually learned that this seemingly inconspicuous second prince actually has such great power in the court. There are so many officials who are close to him. The reason why Fan Xian thought that the second prince was unusually quiet was because, from the perspective of his previous life, in the struggle for imperial power, the crown prince, who had an innate advantage, could basically guarantee his future as long as he did nothing. And in this year, without the eldest princess' secret influence, the crown prince had indeed done so. However, the second prince was different. If he wanted to ascend to the throne in the future, he had to do something. A quiet dog might bite, but a quiet prince must not seize power from others. Yan Bingyun looked at him strangely. It seems that you have decided to get involved in the struggle between the princes, after all. Fan Xian smiled and shook his head. No, I am just making preparations in case they fight in the future until I don't even have a house to live in. Yan Bingyun was silent for a while, as if he was calculating the consequences of this matter. After all, as an official, there was no one who did not care about the future direction of the court, especially young and promising officials like Fan Xian and Yan Bingyun. Sir, are you on the crown prince's side? Yan Bingyun suddenly raised his head and looked directly into Fan Xian's eyes, somewhat unreasonably. He asked such a seemingly stupid, overly direct question that left no room for discussion. Fan Xian was slightly startled, but a smile slowly appeared on his face. He shook his head. No. Yan Bingyun was silent for a moment, then gradually smiled. So you are on the emperor's side. Fan Xian did not say anything. He knew that Yan Bingyun would help him. Yan Bingyun had been locked up for a year, and had long been bored to death. Now that he had returned to the capital, he was still recuperating. If Fan Xian gave him such a fun and exciting thing to do, he was not afraid that he would not take the bait. Yan Bingyun lowered his head and carefully looked through the file again. He shook his head. Although the First Bureau's investigation of the capital is not as good as it was before, it is still not bad. But for something as big as this, it is impossible to rely solely on the intelligence reports in the capital. Information needs to be cross-referenced, and this information is already a finished product. It is not very valuable. I know Mu Tai. He is very capable of handling a single case, but for a big situation like this, he has no control. If you trust me, I will take care of this matter. Trust. Fan Xian looked at his lowered head.
He looked at the silver strands between the eyebrows of this young man, who was only a few years older than him. He narrowed his eyes and said, I trust you.
Trust was a simple and purely subjective matter. How long will it take? Yan Bingyun raised his head. His voice was calm, but it was filled with confidence. I will return to the Fourth Bureau next month. I will let you know before the end of the month. Fan Xian nodded. Is there anything I can help you with? Yan Bingyun shook his head. If this matter gets out of hand, I do not want to be a scapegoat. Don't worry. I love sheep. Fan Xian laughed.
He was not only happy that the two of them seemed to have found the tacit understanding they had in Shangjing, northern Qi, and had begun to plan something together. He was even happier because he knew that if Yan Bingyun really began to investigate this matter, then in the future, Yan Bingyun could only follow Fan Xian. The relationship between the second prince and Xinyang had to be investigated, but it was more important to have Yan Bingyun join his team. Oh right. Yan Bingyun suddenly frowned. I want to ask for a soldier from you. Fan Xian asked curiously, you have been recuperating all this time. Are you secretly investigating something? As for asking for a soldier, Sir Yan has so many elite soldiers in the Fourth Bureau. Do you really need to ask me? Outside the corridor, the rain was coming down even more heavily. The pitter-patter pattered against the stone floor, as if it wanted to create countless pockmarks. The trees in the courtyard, having drunk their fill of water, began to droop their leaves, afraid of the torrential rain. Yan Bingyun's brows flashed with a hint of melancholy and worry. There is a serial murder case in the south, spanning across several prefectures. Many people have died in the 13 yamens of the Ministry of Justice, but they have not been able to catch the murderer. Thus, the case has been transferred to the council by His Majesty. Fan Xian nodded. He was a knowledgeable man. He remembered that when the two of them were in Shangjing, northern Qi, they had received a secret report from the council, but at the time, they had not paid much attention to it. Yan Bingyun did not understand. This is within the jurisdiction of the Fourth Bureau. But after the Fourth Bureau took over, 13 secret agents died in succession, and not a single trace of the murderer was found. Furthermore, the way they died was extremely tragic. According to the report, the murderer was clearly a powerful martial cultivator, but there was no way to confirm what level he was. But seeing as he was able to kill so many investigating officers without a sound, I estimate that he was at least above the 9th level. Fan Xian began to take an interest in this matter. In today's world of peace, as long as a martial cultivator was above the 9th level, no matter what country he was in, he would be strongly recruited by the government. The court would do its best to welcome him, and even the military for some reason had changed its attitude in the past and began to recruit such experts. But there were not many experts above the 9th level in the world. Dongyi was the richest in the world, and Sigu Jian had opened his sword hut to welcome guests, so they had the most experts above the 9th level. So, an expert above the 9th level could be like the Yi family, a member of the military force protecting the Qing kingdom, or like Friar He of northern Qi, a skilled assassin outside of the court. Even if he loved freedom, at the very least, he could go to Dongyi and occasionally help Dongyi's merchant groups as a powerful figure behind the scenes. In his spare time, he could go to Sigu Jian's sword hut to compare skills with other martial cultivators. These were all choices that were rich, noble, and had status in the Jianghu. Serial murder. Was he planning to rape or rob? A 9th level expert definitely did not need to do these things. Perhaps he was a psychopathic killer. Fan Xian sighed. He just liked the thrill of killing. Yan Bingyun furrowed his brows, as if he had not thought that such a person existed in the world. Of course, he did not completely understand what Fan Xian meant by psychopathic. The Fourth Bureau has suffered too many losses,
so the court needs to send powerful martial artists south to investigate. But as you know, there are not many experts above the 9th level.
The ones in the capital are all above my father, so the 4th Bureau cannot say anything, and His Majesty will not agree.
So, I am preparing to borrow soldiers from you. Fan Xian asked curiously. There are no such experts in the 1st Bureau. Even the guards at home are at most 2 7th level experts, and that is already very impressive. Yan Bingyun curled his lips and smiled. I want to borrow Gundam,
and those 6 long knives under his command.
Fan Xian looked at his scheming spirit and wanted to slap him.
In a cold and mocking voice he said, Us 2 brothers have the same wish.
I also wanted to keep Gouda by my side. The first thing I did was ask the old man for it.
And the result?
He spread out his hands. Same as you. It was all wishful thinking. How could someone from the palace lend them to us so easily?
That I don't care.
Yan Bingyun smiled. In the future, if Gundam is transferred to your service, please lend it to the 4th Bureau for a few days. Fan Xian was startled. Seeing the rare smile on Yan Bingyun's face, his heart thumped. He knew that the Yan family had other connections in the capital. Could it be that Yan Bingyun had heard something? Could it be that Gundam's 7 knives were going to be his? Thinking of this, he could not help but feel happy. Thank you for your auspicious words. If that day comes, I will lend them to you. Having finished talking about business, Fan Xian glanced at the quiet room and began to tease him. How have you been with Miss Shen? Yan Bingyun immediately turned into a block of ice at the mention of this.
Sir, please conduct yourself with dignity, he said coldly.
Dignity, my ass. Fan Xian scolded. You tied her up with an iron chain. That is asking her to conduct herself with dignity. But you are just like the assassins from the south I spoke of. Perverted. The rain continued to fall, and the atmosphere was not harmonious. Under the same roof, Fan Xian proudly bared his fangs and brandished his claws. Yan Bingyun was so angry that he could not speak. He could guess that the word, perverted, was not a good word. He was furious. Gritting his teeth, he slapped the chair in pain.
If you had not left her in the diplomatic mission, would I have been tormented to the point of no return?
Disguising her as a maid isn't a long-term solution. Besides, I don't think you need to chain her up. With you in this house, I don't think Miss Shen will be willing to go anywhere else. Fan Xian continued to provoke him with a smile. Then what can I do, sir?
Yan Bingyun laughed coldly.
That great princess of northern Qi is quite something.
She has only been in the capital for a few days, and yet she can order the great prince to come to my manor and put pressure on me to treat Miss Shen well.
She is Shen Zhong's daughter, a wanted criminal in the kingdom of Qi. Right now, I can neither kill her nor let her go. What can I do?
The faint sound of weeping could be heard from the room.
Fan Xian withdrew his gaze from the door.
Only now did he realize that the great prince also knew of this matter.
He frowned. If it is truly inconvenient, I will take Miss Shen back to my manor. Yan Bingyun suddenly raised his head. Fan Xian was strong and silent. After a long time, Yan Bingyun slowly nodded. After they left Yan Manor, they found that there was an additional carriage that had been transferred from Fan Manor. Fan Xian was no longer in the mood to take a walk in the rain. He sat in the carriage and turned his head to look at Miss Shen, whose face was full of fear.
He smiled and comforted her.
Don't worry, Miss Shen. Stay here for a few days. When things have calmed down, I will take you back to Yan Manor.
He had investigated the matter of the second prince because of the death feud between him and the eldest princess. It was also because of some obscure reason that he would never say aloud.
The matter was too big. If he did not have certain things in his hands, he would not dare to fully trust Yan Bingyun.
Although trust was a matter of intuition and judgment, when it was not enough, it was more of a relationship of interest.
The only thing that satisfied Fan Xian was that Miss Shen was in the manor, and he believed that Yan Bingyun would often come to the manor to talk to him. Yan Bingyun was deeply influenced by the culture of the Overwatch Council. Although he was secretly unhappy that Fan Xian had taken Lady Shen away, he did not feel too conflicted. After all, Lady Shen was a ticking time bomb to the Yan Manor. Although it had not exploded yet, it had already caused him and his son to quarrel endlessly every day. Now that Fan Xian had taken her back to the manor, on one hand, the two sides had reached an agreement to seek a balance of trust, and on the other hand, it was a temporary peace. Fan Xian looked out the window at the rainy street and sighed. He thought of a year ago, when he had also opened that chest on a rainy night. He thought of how crazy he had been that night, and then he thought of his own darkness and boredom. Only then did he realize that he had not yet had the time to change the world, but the world had already changed him deeply. As the carriage arrived at the entrance to Dengshi, the rain began to lessen. There were more people, and the carriage slowed down. It seemed to be a little crowded in front, and for a moment it could not move. At that moment, on the long street, which could only accommodate 3 carriages side by side, a carriage overtook them from behind, joining the carriage of Fan Manor. A plump arm with a light yellow sleeve reached out and lifted the curtain of Fan Xian's carriage. "Master!" she called out in surprise. Fan Xian had been watching for a long time. He raised his hand to signal Deng Ziyu, who had already drawn his knife, to stop. He looked over in surprise. He was surprised that after half a year, the man still remembered his master. In the carriage, Yi Linger opened her bright eyes wide and looked at Fan Xian and Lady Shen in shock. Covering her mouth, she said, "You are indeed worthy of being Linger's teacher. Which sister have you tricked?" Fan Xian scolded her unhappily. "You know I'm your master, but you don't know how to be respectful. You're about to become the second princess's wife. What are you doing out here in the rain?" Fan Xian had already begun to suspect the real role the second prince had played in the Nyolan Street murder. The second prince had invited him to the banquet. Although it was later discovered that Si Lily had sent the information to the eldest princess, and the scholar the eldest princess had planted in the prime minister's manor had secretly conspired with Wan Er's second brother, Fan Xian had never let down his guard against the second prince. After returning from his summer vacation by the lake, he had coincidentally met the crown prince. Someone who was used to scheming against others could not be very honorable. Everyone thought that the eldest princess supported the Eastern Palace, including Fan Xian. He had not thought of this at first. But now that he thought about it, with the eldest princess's perverted desire for power, why would she support a legitimate crown prince? What was the point? When Fan Xian and Crown Prince Jing, Li Hongqing, ate at Yishur Tavern, they unexpectedly discovered that Yishur Tavern's backer was the Cui family, and that the Cui family's backer was Xinyang. Although stringing together a few pearls could not prove anything, he firmly believed in his intuition. The second prince's silence was unusual, and he must have a powerful backer in the palace. And if the second prince really was in cahoots with the eldest princess, then Fan Xian could only say sorry. Although he had already begun to investigate the second prince, Fan Xian did not feel much resistance toward the girl in front of him, the girl who would become the second prince's wife next spring. He even hid the expression on his face very well. His first meeting with Yi Linger was not a pleasant one. Later, he used some petty tricks to fight the coffin breaker. But after their marriage, she often came to the manor to play with Wan Er. After a few interactions, Fan Xian began to admire this beautiful girl, whose eyes were as clear as jade. This was because she had a free and easy spirit that was different from that of the other daughters of noble families. But he couldn't stand Yi Linger calling him master in front of Wan Er, and sister. She made him seem older than he was. In the carriage, Yi Linger said excitedly, "Teacher, why don't you come play with me when you're back?" "Teacher, where are you going?" "Teacher." Fan Xian rubbed his temples, listening to the string of words. He smiled bitterly and sighed. "Wukong, you're being naughty again." Chapter 268. Fan Xian had taught Yi Linger a few tricks by the lake. In reality, he had secretly learned the Yi family's coffin breaker technique. Yet, she had called her master from last year to today. This fact made him feel both funny and happy. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to your manor to see Wan Er," replied Yi Linger. After saying this, she looked at Miss Shen, who was standing next to him. She snorted and said nothing. What Fan Xian disliked the most was the sliver of arrogance in her bones, the way she judged others purely by her own judgment. He was silent and did not reply. He put on the airs of a master, but Yi Linger liked it. After a year together, she knew that Fan Xian was someone who cared about details. She smiled. "Don't be angry. I know you're a popular person in the Overwatch Council. Even if you wanted to keep a mistress in your house, you wouldn't have brought her to the streets." Fan Xian smiled and said nothing. At that moment, the crowd ahead seemed to have eased. The Yi family's carriage was the first to move forward, but it stopped there. It seemed that Yi Linger had found something interesting to watch. Fan Xian waved for the carriage to move forward. When they reached the Yi family carriage, he stepped down in his raincoat. Deng Ziyu and the other members of the Qinian unit quickly followed. In the carriage, Yilinger saw them wearing the gray raincoat and walking in the rain. Only then did she realize that Fan Xian was not passing through Dengshiku. He had come specifically to do something. Dai Zhan of the Vegetable Inspection Department at Dengshiku had to wait for his subordinates to bring in the vegetables and fruits from outside the city. He would then classify them and sell them in different markets. At the same time, he had to deal with the daily meals of the internal court and the manners of the nobles. To be more accurate, he was the chef of the Qing kingdom's nobles. However, the scope of his chores was rather broad. A stalk of celery was not worth much, but 100 stalks of celery were worth some money. A chicken was not worth much, but 100 chickens were enough to exchange for a good banquet at Isher House. The Vegetable Inspection Department was not a yamen. It had no rank or rank. Because there were too many places to serve, there was not even a direct yamen. Perhaps it was because the officials felt that there was nothing to be gained from sending vegetables to the capital, so they did not pay much attention to it. In reality, Fan Xian knew that the appearance of this phenomenon had something to do with the new policies that were sometimes implemented and sometimes abandoned halfway. The emperor was playing around blindly, so the organization below was also very chaotic and redundant. As the chief officer of the Produce Inspection Department, Dai Zhen had been steadily earning money from eggs and vegetables all these years. He thought that he was the only one who knew how many benefits were hidden in these unremarkable things. He often hid in his bed in the middle of the night and laughed secretly. Even when his most beloved concubine urged him to go to his uncle every day to ask for a proper official position, he refused. Beautiful! I'm the first person in history to be able to sell vegetables to this extent. Dai Zhen couldn't help praising himself in his heart. But today, he could not be beautiful, nor could he smile. In this autumn rain, the officials of the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council directly sealed his pitifully small yamen and blocked the accounts room of Datong Square. Datong Square was full of vegetable sellers, and a third of the capital's daily vegetables were supplied here. With an ashen face, he rushed to the accounts room and looked at the black-clothed ghosts inside. He patted his cheeks to make his smile seem gentler. So it's the officials of the First Bureau. I was just thinking that since it's late in the autumn, there are some rare fruits in the square. One day I'll have to go show my filial piety. The leader of the First Bureau's investigation today was Mu Feng-er. He knew that today's operation was a demonstration that Commissioner Fan wanted to make in the capital, so he did not dare to be careless. He looked at Dai Zhen coldly and said, "Master Dai, come with us." The officials of the First Bureau had already sealed the account books with familiarity, and began to use the names in the register to point out the people in the square and lock them into the carriages outside. The autumn rain was still falling, and Dai Zhen's heart grew colder. He smiled apologetically and said, "I wouldn't dare to call myself master. Perhaps Master Mu has misunderstood something." He habitually stuffed a banknote into Mu Feng-er's sleeve. Mu Feng-er looked at him and felt pity for him. Had he not even heard of Commissioner Fan leading the First Bureau? Two indifferent Overwatch Council officials stepped forward and unceremoniously kicked Dai Zhen in the back of his knees, knocking him to the ground. They took out a secret rope from behind their waists and tied a difficult-to-untie knot around Dai Zhen's hands. Their movements were unusually clean and efficient. Presumably, the First Bureau had done this many times in the past. Dai Zhen fell to the ground. His mind was in chaos. His wrists were in pain, and he was both embarrassed and angry. Finally, he couldn't help but curse. "What are you doing?" Mu Feng-er touched the instrument in his clothes and thought for a moment. He still did not take it out. "We are here to investigate a case. Master Dai, please cooperate." Dai Zhen panicked. He rolled his eyes and yelled, "Help! The Overwatch Council is murdering for money." When the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council charged into the Produce Inspection Department, the people of Qing, who loved to watch a good show, had already surrounded them. However, they feared the thick black of the Overwatch Council, so the people did not dare get too close. Seeing the usually arrogant Master Dai in such a wretched state, they felt anxious. The thugs that Dai Zhen had secretly kept took advantage of the commotion and blocked the path of the Overwatch Council. Dai Zhen's hands were tied, but his mind was moving quickly. He knew that when the Overwatch Council acted, there was no reason to hold back. He yelled with all his might,
The Overwatch Council is murdering for money.
In reality, he was also panicking. At the moment, he could not think of anything. He could only blindly yell the words, murdering for money, hoping that his uncle in the palace would receive the news as soon as possible and think of a way to get him out before the Overwatch Council threw him into that terrifying prison. Seeing the excited crowd surround them, Mu Feng'er furrowed his brows. He took out a document from his clothes and read Dai Zhen's crimes to the crowd. Most of the hard laborers and commoners in the capital deeply trusted the officials. After all, everyone knew that Dai Zhen's hands and feet were not clean. But the crowd had surrounded them, and it was not easy to retreat. The first bureau had very few people today, and they had to bring account books and related witnesses. It was inevitable that they would be in a difficult position. Seeing this, Mu Feng'er's heart was filled with anger.
From a distance, he glanced outside the crowd of onlookers. Next to two carriages, there were a few unfamiliar colleagues of the Overwatch Council in raincoats surrounding Commissioner Fan.
They were coldly watching through the rain.
Mu Feng'er panicked and yelled, "Let's go!"
Dai Zhen's hands were tied, but he knew that the Overwatch Council's hell was not a place an official could go. His face was red, and his voice was hoarse from crying. Like a child, he desperately sat on the ground and refused to go down. His confidants also surrounded them. Although they did not dare to make a move against the Overwatch Council, they forcefully prevented Mu Feng'er from capturing Fan Xian. In the rain, Fan Xian looked coldly at the scene up and down the stone steps not far away. In his heart, he thought that Mu Feng'er could not be put in an important position. Then he heard Yi Ling'er's curious voice from the carriage behind him. "Teacher, the way the Overwatch Council is doing things is a bit absurd. In broad daylight, you're pulling with a minor official. What a scandal. If the commoners see this, where will the court put its face?" Raindrops hit the brim of Fan Xian's hat, making it lower and covering half of his face. Officials don't want face, so the court doesn't have to give them face. He calmly said, "Ling'er, don't look at this minor official. In a year, he can take more than 5,000 liang of silver from the palace. As for the benefits he's taken from Datong Lane over the years, it's even more incalculable." Half of Yi Ling'er's body was leaning against the carriage window. The rain had soaked a lock of hair on her forehead, and her clear eyes were full of interest. Today, she had gone to Fan Manor to have fun. She hadn't expected to meet Fan Xian on the road, and she had followed him to watch the spectacle. Only now did she realize that such a minor official could take so much money. At this moment, Mu'er and his men had finally fought their way out of the produce inspectorate and arrived in front of Fan Xian. Dai Zhen had been dragged by them through the rain. It was a miserable sight. The thugs also surrounded them, but they seemed to be able to see the power and influence these two carriages represented, so they did not dare to act rashly. As for the commoners of the capital, they looked at Fan Xian and Deng Ziyu's attire and seemed to be able to feel the coldness emanating from these people in raincoats, so they unconsciously retreated a little further away. Dai Zhen was truly a shrewish minor official. His official robes had long been soaked in dirty water, and his hair was scattered across his slightly round face. He looked battered and exhausted, but he still fiercely scolded, "You Overwatch Council people eat and drink from us. Haven't you taken enough? You want to take me back to torture me for money again." When the ignorant commoners heard him say this, they couldn't help but look as if they had suddenly understood. Fan Xian slightly lowered his eyelids and looked at the official in front of him, who was sprawled in the rain and kicking his legs like a pig on the verge of death. He was not in a hurry to seal his mouth, because the Overwatch Council in the hearts of the world's people had long ago formed an incomparably dark image. Even if Dai Zhen cursed a few more times, it would not affect the overall situation. And today, he was only beating a small cat. The key was that he wanted to see how capable his subordinates were. Looking at Mu Feng'er, who was in front of him with a face full of guilt and a trace of anger, Fan Xian shook his head and asked, "Why didn't you choose to go to his house in the middle of the night and take him? Although it's raining today, you know that there are many people in Datong Square. It's easy for trouble to happen." Mu Feng'er was startled. In the new regulations, it was written very clearly that in the future, cases should be handled in the open as much as possible. That's why he had chosen to go to the Yamen to arrest people. He wanted to do it beautifully and make a name for himself. If it had been before, if the Overwatch Council really wanted to arrest an official, of course, it would have been in the middle of the night. They would have gone to his house and taken him away. How did this become his fault again? Fan Xian didn't wait for him to explain. Even if you wanted to come during the day, you could have sealed the accounts room and left immediately. Given your methods, could you not have allowed Dai Zhen to return to the council quietly? What use are you keeping those methods? What crimes do you still have to recite? Do you think you're an official of the Supreme Court? Do I have to specially hire a scholar to follow you and proclaim the sacred religion? Hearing these sharp and piercing words, Mu Feng repeatedly complained. On one hand, Dai Zhen's backing was indeed strong enough. If he used his methods recklessly, he was afraid there would be trouble in the future.
On the other hand, he was also worried that the commissioner was a great scholar and might not be able to see them do such shady work.
Hearing Fan Xian's sarcasm, he realized that although the commissioner had the reputation of being an immortal poet, it seemed that he was not opposed to the Overwatch Council's shady methods. In fact, he seemed to be even more passionate about them than Mu Feng was. At this time, Dai Zhen was still lying in the rain and crying.
His muddy eyes saw who Mu Feng was reporting to.
He knew it was someone from the Overwatch Council, and he couldn't help but feel afraid. He didn't recognize Fan Xian, but he recognized Yi Ling in the carriage behind him. Yi Ling was the only daughter of the capital's garrison. Ever since she was a child, she had liked to ride horses on the streets of the capital. There were not many people in the capital who didn't know her. Dai Zhen immediately cried to the woman in the carriage. "Miss Yi, please help me." Yi Ling looked at Fan Xian's calm and somewhat strange expression. She didn't dare say anything. She pulled her head back. Dai Zhen knew that day was over. He finally used his trump card.
In a loud voice he shouted, "Do you know who my uncle is?
How dare you arrest me? My uncle is..." "Oh." Seeing Fan Xian's look, Deng Ziyu knew that he didn't want to hear Eunuch Dai's name. He raised his knife and slapped it across Dai Zhen's mouth. Only now did Mu Feng understand. With some shame, he took out a small wooden stick with two ends attached to a rope and roughly shoved it into Dai Zhen's mouth. The wooden stick was very hard, and it broke the corners of Dai Zhen's mouth. 2 streaks of blood flowed down. Naturally, he couldn't speak. The crowd around them cried out in alarm. Fan Xian turned a deaf ear to them. He only said to Mu Feng, "I don't care who his uncle is. I only care who your uncle is. Do your job well and don't embarrass Mu Tai." Mu Feng made a sound of shameful acknowledgement. He threw Dai Zhen, whose face was covered in blood, back into the carriage. He turned around and led his subordinates to capture a few thugs hidden among the crowd. They didn't give them any chance to resist.
They used the iron rods that were commonly used in the council and viciously smashed them to the ground.
Seeing this, the crowd was fearful. They scattered in all directions, but they stopped at the corner of the street and looked back curiously. In the midst of the torrential rain, a few Overwatch Council spies in raincoats were waving sticks and beating the thugs on the ground with dark expressions. Perhaps it was because of the power of the Overwatch Council over the years, but the thugs didn't dare to fight back. The scene was bloody. Fan Xian looked at the crowd in the distance and shook his head imperceptibly. Surprisingly, he didn't return to his carriage. Instead, he lifted his hat and went straight into Yi Ling's carriage. Yi Ling was startled. How could a man like him get into her carriage? Fan Xian pretended not to realize this. He looked at Yi Ling's slightly wet hair and paused. He took out a handkerchief and handed it to her. Yi Ling took it and wiped her wet hair. Smelling the faint fragrance on the handkerchief, she thought it was Wan Er's. She smiled and began to ask what had happened earlier. Fan Xian laughed bitterly and told her what Dai Zhen had done. Yi Ling asked curiously, "How could such a small matter be worthy of your personal attention?" Fan Xian laughed coldly. "The waters of the capital are deep. Don't think that Dai Zhen is just an official in charge of selling vegetables. He's quite greedy. The reason he's so daring is because he has a good backer. His uncle is Eunuch Dai of the palace. I'm here today to keep watch. I'm afraid my subordinates will act too slowly and alarm Eunuch Dai. If I don't act, the first bureau won't be able to do anything to the people in the palace." Yi Ling opened her bright eyes wide. "Father once said that matters in the palace are the most complicated. He told me and my brother to stay out of it. Master, you're quite daring." "He's just a eunuch." Fan Xian laughed. Eunuchs have no human rights, he thought. Yi Ling shook her head disapprovingly. "Don't underestimate the eunuchs in the palace. They have their own masters. If you embarrass them, You'll be disrespecting the concubines in the palace. Fan Xian was slightly taken aback. It seemed that he had only just thought of this problem. After a moment, his face returned to a sunny smile.
What's there to be afraid of?
I don't like Wan going to the palace as a lobbyist. If the concubines make trouble for me, as a fake son-in-law, the worst that can happen is that I'll be punished by the palace.
Yiling tilted her head slightly. She looked at this fearless fellow, and it was impossible to tell what she was thinking.
The carriage arrived at the main gate of Fan Manor, and the two of them got off. Ting Zijing was already waiting outside. Fan Xian told him to have his wife take care of Miss Shan in a house in the back street, and then he led Yiling into the manor. He didn't forget to ask for the handkerchief in Yiling-er's hand. The handkerchief had been stolen from Hai Tang, and Fan Xian couldn't bear to give it away. Eunuch Dai was Consort Shu's favorite in the palace, and Yiling was about to become the second imperial concubine. This meant that Consort Shu was Yiling-er's future mother-in-law, and Yiling was about to become Eunuch Dai's half-master. Fan Xian had chatted with Yiling earlier for the sake of this relationship. He couldn't bear to give her the handkerchief, but he had to use it wherever he could. The rain continued to fall in the capital all day, and at dusk, it finally lessened. Eunuch Dai, who had received the news, rushed out of the palace, flustered and exasperated. He was a popular figure in the palace, and because Consort Shu's literary talent was exceptional, she often helped the emperor copy some speeches. Even as Consort Shu's personal attendant, he also had the task of delivering imperial edicts to various manors. For example, when Fan Xian had first received the title of functionary of Taichung Temple, it had been this Eunuch Dai who had delivered the edict. By delivering edicts to various manors, he had naturally received many benefits.
Now that he had broken the rules and entered the palace, no one dared to say a word.
Eunuch Dai stood at the entrance of the produce inspectorate, his face bright red. He looked at the mess inside and heard the cries of pain coming from the people around him. He couldn't help but feel angry.
Pointing at his nephew's subordinates, he yelled, "I told you a long time ago. You can ignore the other yamens in the capital, but the Overwatch Council must be fawned over." One of the men covered his swollen cheek and cried, "My ancestor, we've given them a lot of benefits.
Today, I even gave them a banknote, and the official of the First Bureau accepted it. Who would have thought that they would copy it without error?" Eunuch Dai's entire body shook with anger.
In a sharp voice, he yelled, "Who dared to not give me face?"
Which little bastard led the team? I'm going to find that black-faced Mu Tai. How dare he touch the Dai family's seedling?
He was a palace eunuch, and the Overwatch Council had no control over him, so he had the right to say such things.
In his anger, he took his sedan chair to the First Bureau to demand Dai Zhen's return. Although his nephew, Dai Zhen, was a good-for-nothing, he had still sent over a lot of silver every year. He couldn't just watch as the Overwatch Council tortured him until he was half dead. In the capital's bureaucracy, who didn't know that the Overwatch Council was a place like that? Even if you made it out alive, you'd probably be missing a few parts. The sedan chair arrived at the entrance of a yamen, but Eunuch Dai was suspicious. He first had his attendant go in and make some inquiries. Not long after, the attendant came out and whispered something in his ear. Eunuch Dai's face immediately changed.
After lingering for a long time, he gritted his teeth and said, "Return to the palace."
The injured thug saw that the old man's sedan chair was returning to the palace, and he panicked.
Ignoring the fact that he was at the entrance of the First Bureau, he shouted, "Old master, you must uphold justice for us."
Eunuch Dai was indeed a man born in Jiangxia.
His experience of announcing imperial edicts had trained him to be a master of speech.
He spat out a mouthful of phlegm and spat it right onto the man's face.
In a trembling voice he cursed, "I'm Eunuch Dai,
not justice." Having said this, he nestled back into the sedan chair, feeling very uneasy. His attendant had asked around earlier, and the person who was personally leading the team today was Sir Fan Jr. Eunuch Dai now remembered that the Emperor had already given the First Bureau to Commissioner Fan. But why did this Sir Fan Jr. take a liking to his nephew? Eunuch Dai knew that even if his nephew was greedy, compared to the officials of the capital, he was still nothing but an ant. How could he have guessed that Fan Xian, who only wanted to train soldiers and open a business, would think of him? Thinking of the Fan family's overwhelming power, Eunuch Dai couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. Dai Jin's thug watched the small sedan chair leave in a cloud of dust, and stupidly wiped the disgusting spittle from his face. He still didn't understand who Eunuch Dai was afraid of. A few days later, Eunuch Dai found an opportunity to bring up the matter in front of Lady Xu, hoping to get his nephew out of trouble and also to get some information. Unexpectedly, Lady Xu had somehow found out about this beforehand, and knew exactly what his nephew Dai Zhan had done. Angry, she harshly chastised him. Only now did Eunuch Dai realize that Sir Fan Jr. had already used some means to cut off his escape route. In his shock and fear, he finally cast aside his old face and humbly went to Yi Guiping's palace to curry favor. Only then did he use Lady Lu's connections to quietly hand over a thin silver note to Fan Manor. On the other side, Mu Feng'er, who was in charge of the case, was also scratching his head. He looked at Dai Zhan, who had not been transferred to the Celestial Prison, and felt a burst of anger in his heart. It was this scoundrel who had caused him to lose face in front of Commissioner Fan, but Commissioner Fan had ordered that this minor character should not be punished. Why? His hand touched the rich silver note that had just been issued to him, and he couldn't help but mutter to himself. Chapter 269. Fan Xian had ordered the First Bureau to arrest Dai Zhan precisely because he had the head eunuch behind him. The officials in the capital discovered that even Eunuch Dai had succumbed, and they were naturally intimidated by the determination of the First Bureau and Fan Xian's methods. The First Bureau's work was carried out in the capital in an orderly and secretive manner. In accordance with the rules of previous years, they broke down doors in the dark and quietly escorted the officials back to the council. The sudden purge brought a chill to the capital. The officials in the capital thought that this great scholar was going to stir up a storm in the capital, just like the case in the spring. But gradually people discovered that this was not the case. The officials investigated in this storm were all of relatively low rank. There were no important figures in the various factions, and there were no major cases that involved a lot of people. The elders of the court and the subordinates of the various princes, for Fan Xian's sake, and having learned from Eunuch Dai's mistakes, did not react violently. As time passed, they discovered that this storm did not touch on the important parts of the bureaucracy, and that there were only a few minor incidents. The officials, who had been a little nervous, relaxed. They guessed that Fan Xian was just a new official, and was using these 3 fires to establish his authority. Although the fire was not large, there were still people who were worried about being caught up in it. So in the past few days, Lady Lu had become the busiest person in Fan Manor. Her pair of hands, which usually liked to hand out banknotes without the slightest bit of emotion, now began to collect the banknotes with great compassion. Naturally, these banknotes were all transferred to Fan Xian. Fan Xian distributed most of them to the bureau and sent the rest to Yan Manor. From ancient times until now, from Fan Shen's world to Fan Xian's world, money had always been the ultimate tool to win over people's hearts and pacify them. So the employees of the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council were much more motivated, and the officials who had succeeded in intimate contact with the wife of the minister also felt a lot more at ease. Those who gave money, those who received it, they all comforted themselves. The affairs were already on the right track, so Fan Xian did not go to Xinfeng restaurant today. Instead, he sat in his study and flipped through the files in his hands. The files had been compiled by Mu Tai. Although the writing was not exquisite, it was clear. After paying a large fine, Eunuch Dai's nephew was lucky enough to return unscathed from the Overwatch Council. Taking advantage of a loophole in Qing law, he was not moved to the Ministry of Justice or the Supreme Court. However, he could no longer be a minor official in the Produce Inspection Bureau. The other small cases were handled more gently. Logically speaking, since the Overwatch Council was investigating the Produce Inspection Bureau case, Dai Zhan would not only lose his official position, but he would also lose his head. But Fan Xian somewhat appreciated Eunuch Dai's knowledge and tactfulness. He had saved him some trouble in the future, and Yi Ling had silently entered the palace to speak up for him. She had also passed on concubine Shu's plea for leniency. This was a favor he had to sell. Shi Chanli looked at his young teacher across the desk, and felt a little uneasy. After the spring examinations, his 3 good friends, Ho Jicheng, Yang Wanli, and Cheng Shilin, had been sent out to become officials. According to the letters, they were doing well in various counties and provinces. Prime Minister Lin had been in the court for many years, so naturally he had connections all over the counties and provinces. These people all had their eyes on Fan Xian, and as for Fan Xian's 3 prized students, they naturally had to be taken care of. Of the 4, Only Xueqi did not have a name on the list, so he could not immediately embark on an official career. Before Fan Xian left for Northern Qi, he left a letter for Xueqi to wait for his return. Unexpectedly, after Fan Xian returned, he immediately took over the affairs of the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council. Xueqi was not sure what he could do to help his teacher. His friend had already become a ruler of a region, while he himself could only sit in his study and transcribe files. Even though he was an easygoing person, he could not help but feel sad. Fan Xian raised his head and glanced at him. With a smile he said, "Do you think it's too stuffy?" Xueqi smiled bitterly. "Teacher, you are a few years younger than me, and yet you can be so calm in the midst of complicated documents. It seems that I also need to sharpen my temperament." Fan Xian chuckled. If Ho Jichong were here, he would certainly stand up and reply. If it was Yang Wanli, perhaps he would have already been unable to suppress his curiosity, and begun to question why Fan Xian had released a felon. Only Xueqi was not impatient, nor did he have a dull tongue. It seemed that Fan Xian's decision to keep him by his side had not been a mistake. "Don't call me teacher," he said. "I'd rather you call me sir. It's not that it's too official, but it feels a little absurd." Xueqi was stunned. In fact, it was very common for examinees to be younger than the examiners. He did not feel that there was anything wrong with it. Fan Xian handed over the files on the table. "What do you think?" he asked. Xueqi did not know whether or not Fan Xian was testing him, but he had memorized these documents in the past 2 days. He shook his head and said sincerely, "I really do not understand, teacher, what you mean by this. If you really wanted to fight a tiger, you wouldn't have to keep an eye on these mice." Fan Xian smiled. "I just wanted to find something for the cats of the First Bureau to do. Familiarize themselves with it, so that when we do something big in the future, they won't be so flustered." Xueqi pretended not to hear the word big, and sincerely asked for guidance. "Sir, as an official in the court, I naturally have to share His Majesty's worries and work for the court. But looking at your actions these past few days, although you have caught the small and the big, you have still offended some people." Offending people is a characteristic of the Overwatch Council, Fan Xian explained. "You also know that the Overwatch Council is His Majesty's private organization. It is not a true public tool, but His Majesty's private tool. We only have one person we are loyal to, so whether it is from the perspective of the palace or the Overwatch Council, we must play the role of offending people. And the First Bureau is deep in the capital. Being hindered by the prosperity of the capital, it has completely lost His Majesty's original intention. It is not valiant enough, not sinister enough. His Majesty put me in charge of the First Bureau because he wants the First Bureau to return to its original role of offending people." Xueqi could no longer pretend. His teacher had already explained everything to him. He could only answer honestly. "His Majesty wants you to be a lonely official." Fan Xian nodded. "I am not biased. His Majesty wants me to be a second Chen Ping Ping, but—" His tone changed and he said with a hint of mockery, "I went to visit the director's manor. The manor is extravagant and luxurious, but that loneliness is carved into the bones. I do not like it." Xueqi immediately understood what he meant. He said worriedly, "But if you feign civility, His Majesty's eyes are like torches. He can see clearly. I am afraid it will not be good for your future." Fan Xian smiled and did not say anything. He thought that under normal circumstances, the emperor would not have thoughts more poisonous than a tiger's. Xueqi understood that he had said too much, so he changed the subject. "The First Bureau is investigating now. Although they have reverted to their tradition of arresting people at night, the First Bureau has refused to cover up the news. If anyone asks, they will tell them the truth." "I do not agree." Fan Xian asked with interest, "Why?" Xueqi thought for a moment and said, "The Overwatch Council is His Majesty's secret organization. The reason it can intimidate the officials, other than the special privileges established by Qing law, is because of its sense of mystery and darkness. People are ignorant. The more they don't understand something, the more afraid they are. Now that you have purposely put the First Bureau's actions on the table, I am afraid it will weaken this feeling and cause the people of the court to look down on the Overwatch Council." Fan Xian admitted that what Xueqi said made sense, but he still said,
I know you do not agree with some of the clauses in the new regulations of the First Bureau, such as releasing information. I also admit that if the Overwatch Council continues to maintain the image of a man-eating demon in the dark, it will be very convenient for us to do things.
Xueqi was surprised that his teacher would agree with him. He wondered if Fan Xian did not want the people of the world to see him as a monster? Did he want to change their image? What Fan Xian said next immediately overthrew his imagination.
I do not care what the people of the world think of the Overwatch Council. But you must understand that I am only in charge of the First Bureau, not the entire council.
The First Bureau is located in the capital.
Other than the secret agents in the manners of the nobles, there is no way to hide anything. The officials of the capital are as numerous as the swimming carp, and there are countless connections between them. Since there is no way to maintain the mystery of the First Bureau, then I might as well do it openly.
Perhaps it will be more of a deterrent.
He then said seriously, however, I only want the results of the investigation to be presented in the light.
I don't expect the process to be the same. I can accept any dark means used in the middle. You should know that I don't want to be a saint. Xueqi nodded, feeling very comforted. It seemed that his teacher was indeed someone who dared to expose the corruption of the bureaucracy, but was temporarily holding back. Fan Xian looked at him, not knowing what Xueqi thought of him.
He said, from today onwards, for every case investigated by the First Bureau, after the case has been closed and sent to the Supreme Court or the Ministry of Justice, you must write a report detailing the cause of the case and so on.
Then you must make an announcement. I have already chosen a place to put up the announcement.
It will be on the wall between the First Bureau and the Supreme Court.
Xueqi was dumbfounded. This is against the rules. It is not the Ministry of Justice that issues the wanted posters, nor is it the court that issues the list. The Overwatch Council also has to make an announcement?
Fan Xian said unhappily, not the Overwatch Council, but the First Bureau.
Didn't I say earlier that it had to be more open? Are you going to make me write a novel and sell it everywhere?
Xueqi immediately replied with joy. That would be best. It can solve the confusion of the people, and it can also slightly maintain the feeling that the First Bureau is not close to strangers. And you have opened a bookstore, so it is most convenient.
Fan Xian exhaled in anger and stood up to leave. Xueqi carefully followed behind him. Finally, he couldn't help but ask, Teacher, does this mean that I will start working in the Overwatch Council?
Fan Xian sighed. He knew that the scholars of the world did not want to enter the sinister and shameless secret service. He patted Xueqi on the shoulder and said, You are my private secretary.
I will speak to my father and temporarily hang you in the Ministry of Revenue. We will discuss this another day. Don't worry, no one will point at your back and call you a dog of the Overwatch Council.
Walking through the astonishingly large garden in the back of Fan Manor, Fan Xian frowned.
Using dark methods to achieve a bright result? He didn't think of himself as a saint who would let himself be wronged.
Although he was very willing to do things for the people of the Kingdom of Qing, such as slightly curbing the corrupt atmosphere in the officialdom, and at least ensuring that the dam in the south would not collapse so quickly, the rectification of the First Bureau was more out of his own selfishness. Although he had the title of immortal poet, and now he had the secret praise of a new generation of literary leaders, when he clashed with the dark filth that had accumulated in the Overwatch Council for 20 years, his reputation would always be somewhat damaged.
So he wanted to make the First Bureau brighter, because a good reputation would help him greatly in the future. Thinking of the words about darkness and light, he couldn't help but think of when he was chatting with Hai Tang in northern Qi. She said, The dark night gave me black eyes, but I will use them to roll my eyes at the world. He couldn't help but worry about the situation in the north. He didn't know if Hai Tang would be able to properly arrange the matter he had entrusted to her. Uncle Wu Zhu was still playing missing, and there was no news of Ku He returning to Shangjing. Far away in the garden, a few girls were chatting. It was a sunny day, and the grasshoppers were hopping around in the grass after autumn. The cicadas in the trees took advantage of the last moments of their lives to call out with all their might, drowning out the voices of the girls. De Bao was catching ants by the courtyard wall. Fan Xizha was not at school, but he was not at home either. Fan Xian squinted and saw that Yi Ling had come again today. He couldn't help but secretly groan. That girl thought she had done Fan Xian a great favor, and these days she had been coming to the manor to play. When he saw that the shy Princess Ro Jia sitting next to Yi Linger, he felt even more bitter. A 12-year-old girl had become a 13-year-old. but she was still a girl, and Fan Xian didn't want to be stared at with adoration. Recently, he had refused Li Hongqing's invitations to dinner many times. Before Yan Bingyun's investigation was complete, he had to hide. And today, he had to hide from Ro Jia, the little girl who had secretly expressed her love for him. Circulating the zhenqi in his body, Sir Fan's body lightened. He demonstrated the lightness he had learned from the shadows of the staff. He flew over the yellow grass and quietly leaped out of the manor. Arriving at Shanjing Road in Jingdou, the manor that Wang Qinian had bought for 120 liang of silver, Fan Xian sat in the innermost room and stretched comfortably. This was his most secretive nest. Other than the Qinian unit and Chen Pingping, not even his family knew that he often conducted official and private business here. Deng Ziyu's expression was solemn as he placed the 2 bamboo tubes on the table and retreated. He knew that he did not have the commissioner's trust as Wang Qinian did, so he consciously left the room. The color of the bamboo tubes was very similar. Perhaps they were both produced at the foot of Yan Mountain near Shangjing. The wax used to seal the tubes was also very similar. They were both intact and probably untouched. Only the secret markings on the bamboo joints let the secret agents of the Overwatch Council in charge of transmitting intelligence know that these 2 extremely secretive letters belong to 2 separate routes in the northern system. Fan Xian picked up the bamboo tube. The first thing he did was to confirm that no one had opened it. Wang Qinian's calligraphy on the wax had the charm of Pan Ling. It was indeed not easy to fake. Only then did he relax and open the bamboo tube, taking out the 2 letters inside. One letter was from Si Lily, and the other was from Hai Tang. To make it easier to communicate with Hai Tang, Fan Xian had set up a special line of communication for her. Si Lily did not send any important intelligence. Although she had already followed Fan Xian and Hai Tang's plan and converted to Tianyi Dao, her efforts to enter the palace had not yet yielded any results. In Shangjing, Xin Zhong's family had been destroyed. Other than dealing a heavy blow to the empress's power, there was not much of a reaction. Shang Shanhu had also been confined to his home. At the end of the letter, it was said that the imperial advisor of northern Qi, Ku He, had returned to Shangjing and had been in seclusion. Although no one dared to suspect anything, Si Lily was convinced that the peerless master must have been injured. Fan Xian smiled. In this world, there were only 2 or 3 great grandmasters who could fight with that man-eating monster, Ku He. In Hai Tang's letter, there was not even half a word about that great grandmaster. He and Hai Tang had a mutually beneficial relationship, so naturally, he did not expect her to say anything. He was only concerned about whether or not the auspicious sign had been properly arranged. After some thought, he began to write back, urging Hai Tang to fulfill her promise. For Hai Tang, this was just a matter of convenience, but for Fan Xian, it was of great importance. In his reply to Si Lily, he only copied a small poem from Li Qingzhao as a consolation, and did not say anything else. In the days that he had been dealing with the First Bureau, Fan Xian had been thinking about the issue of Ruoruo and Li Hongqing's marriage. This matter had nothing to do with the Crown Prince's character, or whether or not there was a conflict of political standpoints between the 2. For Fan Xian, the most important thing was one thing. Did his sister like it? Ruoruo had already made her stance clear. She didn't like it. Fan Xian, like all older brothers, was confused and angry at girls in their puberty. He thought to himself, "Are you not going to marry?" But more than that, he wanted to protect her. Since his sister didn't like it, he had to break up the marriage. It was simple. This was no small matter. In fact, it could be said to be the most troublesome thing Fan Xian had encountered since coming to the capital from Danzhou. The emperor had appointed a marriage, and the 2 families were well matched. There was no reason to obstruct this marriage. So there were only 2 ways to proceed. First, keep an eye on the second prince and be ready to destroy him at any moment, dragging Li Hongqing down. When that time came, he could ask to break off the marriage. Second, start with Ruoruo. Give her a benefit that even the emperor could not ignore, and temporarily keep her away from the capital. The first method, who knew how much of a ruckus it would cause, and the second method was too vague. Even Fan Xian himself had no confidence in it. They say that a general success is built on the bones of 10,000 people. Do I have to create a marriage to break the bones of 10,000 people? He laughed self-deprecatingly. If that didn't work out, he would have to trouble Uncle Wu Zhu to take Ruoruo on a journey to the ends of the earth. Presumably, His Majesty would not actually execute the entire Fan family because of this. Chapter 270. Returning to the manor, Yi Linger and Princess Rojia had already returned. Fan Xian returned to his room and called for Xueqi to pour tea. He sent away the serving girl, who, like Cece, had been complaining about him in the autumn.
Taking advantage of the fact that there was only him and his wife in the room, he quietly asked, "Has there been any news in the palace?"
Lin Wanner was sitting by the window, embroidering something against the light outside. Hearing his question, she raised her head in surprise.
"What has happened?"
It was close to dusk, and the light from the sky shone in through the window. Fan Xian looked at Wanner's tightly furrowed brows, and his heart ached as he walked forward.
He rubbed her smooth brows and said, "The light is not good."
"What are you embroidering?" Wanner's face was a bit pale. Perhaps it was because she had not slept well last night. She lowered her head and giggled. She hid what she was embroidering behind her back and said, "I'll show you when I'm done." Fan Xian looked at his wife's weak appearance and long eyelashes.
He couldn't help but feel a glimmer of guilt.
Ever since he had left Jingdo at the beginning of spring, his care for his wife had been weaker than it had been last year. This was not to say that he was someone who liked the new and hated the old. After all, the great Sir Fan Jr. did not even have a concubine. It was just that there were too many things holding him back, and he rarely paid attention to family matters.
Lin Wanner thought of what he had asked earlier.
She thought for a moment and then said, "The palace has been quiet recently. There is nothing special. Why would you ask this?" Fan Xian smiled bitterly. "Your heartless uncle sent me to manage the first bureau. I don't know how many officials I will offend. The true masters of those officials all live in the palace. Naturally, I have to pay more attention." Lin Wanner's identity was special.
She had the royal grandmother's favor and the emperor's favor.
Her position in the palace was even higher than Fan Xian had imagined. The emperor did not have a daughter. Presently, Qing Kingdom did not have a proper princess. Wanner was not much different from a princess. She thought for a moment and then smiled. "Don't worry. We all know the emperor favors you. Those ladies will only say good things about you in front of you." Fan Xian smiled and said, "I've only seen the emperor a few times. I don't know where the word favor comes from. If it said that the emperor favors you, then it's possible. As for me, it's just love me, love my dog." A trace of adoration flashed through Lin Wanner's eyes. "Husband is always like this." She continued, "Xu Guifei has been full of praise for you these days. As for Yi Gui Pin, you also know that she is a relative of our family. No matter what, she has to side with you. It's just that the empress is as quiet and indifferent as usual. As for the other concubines, they don't even have the right to speak in the palace, so I haven't remembered them." Fan Xian trusted his wife's judgment. Even if he took over the Overwatch Council in the future, the royal palace was still a place that his fingers could not touch. And Wanner was his most reliable spy and spy. Lady Xu had said good things about him because he had done her a favor. A few words didn't cost him much money. "What did Lady Ning say?" Fan Xian asked curiously.
"News of me and your great brother fighting over the road should have reached the palace a long time ago." Lin Wanner covered her mouth and laughed.
"Lady Ning can't be bothered with you. She has always loved me the most. She said that you and the great prince are two brats messing around. In the future, she will beat you 50 times. Fan Xian pretended to be alarmed. "My wife, the beatings in the palace are not pleasant. You have to help me put in a few good words." Lin Wanner was too lazy to respond to his naughty joke. She spat and said, "You like to offend people, and for no reason, you always want me to clean up after you." She took out the tight embroidery from behind her and giggled. "You have nothing to ask, Commissioner? Then please leave. Don't disturb me." Fan Xian pulled back his hand that was about to grab her hand. "I don't know what it is," he said gloomily. Just as he was about to leave, he remembered the important person he had forgotten. With a trace of hesitation, he asked, "Did you see the Empress Dowager?" Lin Wanner's hand paused. A moment later, she raised her head. There was confusion and sadness in her eyes. She nodded. "I saw her." Grandmother didn't say anything. The Empress Dowager, who had always lived deep in the palace, was in reality the true ruler of the entire palace. Strangely, Fan Xian had entered the palace a few times, but had never had the chance to see her. Even the last 2 times the couple had entered the palace, the Empress Dowager had said she was ill and refused to see her. And when Wanner entered the palace herself, the Empress Dowager loved her dearly. She held her in her arms and called her, darling. The Empress Dowager was clearly distancing herself from Fan Xian. This made Wanner feel vaguely uneasy and confused. Fan Xian laughed coldly in his heart. He knew that the Empress Dowager had guessed something, but he was not afraid. Lin Wanner looked into his eyes and sighed. Today, she told me about Linger entering the palace last time. Husband, I know your official duties are a bit difficult, but you still don't know what kind of person you are. It looks like you are using her, but I'm afraid you are giving yourself an excuse to remember her favor. The things you told me last night are very scary. Second brother, although the second prince looks soft and easygoing right now, his personality is actually very twisted. Since you have no choice but to investigate him, if you still have so many misgivings like you do now, I'm afraid it is not appropriate. Fan Xian looked at his wife's worried face and smiled slightly. He nodded. I also didn't expect that when you were little, you would give the second prince the name Pebble. He looks easygoing, but once he sets his mind on something, he will not change, Lin Wanner said worriedly. Fan Xian had always believed that the way of a husband and wife was based on sincerity. If he was reborn, he would have to be more cautious of the person who slept next to him. That kind of life would be a bit miserable, so he did not hide the fact that he was investigating the second prince from his wife. Hearing Wanner's worry, he comforted her. In reality, it is for the good of the second prince. Looking at the current situation, the court officials seem to be blinded by the emperor's determination to protect the crown prince. If no one pulls the second prince up now, when he truly climbs to the top, it will not be easy for him to come down again. Lin Wanner smiled sweetly and did not continue this topic. She changed the subject. I don't know how your heart was born, but it has a few more openings than other people. Your brain is full of twists and turns. A few more openings than a person? Fan Xian almost blurted it out, but he knew that he was just an actor. When it came to politics, he was very naive. The only thing he could rely on was his own cold-bloodedness and the gentleness on the surface. He bowed deeply to his wife and smiled. How could I be compared to the great strategist Lin? You are a fairy who escaped from the most scheming palace in the world. Lin Wanner spat at him and laughed. Do you really think the palace is so embarrassing? Fan Xian smiled. A wise man once said that in this world, there are only brothels and the palace. It is a world of darkness. It is not a place for people to stay. Hearing this, Lin Wanner was startled. She felt a bit displeased and lowered her head. Only now did Fan Xian remember that his wife also came from the palace. What he said really did not take her feelings into consideration. He smiled and apologized, and the two of them returned to normal. After a moment of silence, Lin Wanner thought about it carefully. Her heart was moved. Although her birth mother was the eldest princess, how many women in this world could receive such respectful treatment from their husbands after marriage? She had never heard of a husband apologizing to his wife. Lin Wanner said warmly, "The palace is indeed not what you think it is. Uncle the Emperor is a wise ruler who does not lust after women. The masters in the palace are all decent on the surface. No one dares to use the methods you talked about in the novels in the past. The Empress Dowager's eyes are watching. If anyone dares to spoil the blood of the Emperor, that ancestor will not tolerate it." Hearing this, Fan Xian's heart jumped. He felt even more at ease. Lin Wanner smiled. The Emperor is very strict within the palace. Fighting for favor? There is no favor to begin with, so how can they fight? The Empress does not care much, so those concubines can only put all their thoughts on the mahjong table. Fighting for favor is good. In reality, it is no different from the houses of other princes. Fan Xian was surprised. He had not thought that the palace would be so harmonious. Didn't that mean that the pile of palace grievances he had read in his previous life were useless? He scratched his head in self-mockery and laughed. No wonder you are so good at mahjong, Wanner. Even that little monster Fan Xija can only tie with you. As soon as she heard about mahjong, Lin Wanner's face shone with a strange light, which scared Fan Xian. He walked up to take a closer look, only to find that the light was hidden like flowing light, but it was contained within. It was like a piece of jade. It was called The Light of a Master Who Returned to Simplicity.
Lin Warner's eyes wandered, and she glared at her indecent husband.
My hands are itching to marry you, but you are so busy every day that I can't see you. But my luck is good. I managed to catch a genius at the mahjong table like my brother-in-law. She gritted her teeth, rolled her sleeves, and rubbed her fists. I don't know where Fan Xija has gone these days. Every day he can't catch anyone at the mahjong table. Playing mahjong with his mother is torturous. Look at how courteous she is. It's like I am her mother-in-law.
Fan Xian scratched the bridge of her sharp little nose and jokingly scolded, "Who talks like that?" He paused and then said, "Lady Lu is not your mother-in-law.
Don't be too unreasonable in the manner."
Lin Warner was full of hidden bitterness.
Am I that kind of person? Her tone changed. In a few days, it will be time to admire the chrysanthemums. According to the rules of the past, the nobles in the palace will all go to Shi Mountain. I don't know how they will arrange for us this year. We must go, but we have to see how we go. I reckon that in a few days, there will be eunuchs from the palace coming to deliver an edict. Don't forget about this. Admire the chrysanthemums? Fan Xian's brows twitched. He knew that in the crisp autumn air, the people of Jingdo all liked to go to the gardens to admire the chrysanthemums. He had not thought that the royal family would also have this hobby. Naturally, he had to go to the Li family's large gathering. However, thinking of what he had done recently in Jingdo, he suddenly wondered if the older generation of foxes were watching his every move like they were admiring the chrysanthemums. Not noticing her husband's sudden silence, Lin Warner said seriously, I haven't been able to play mahjong lately, and the chrysanthemums haven't bloomed yet. I'm always bored. The book you promised me before marriage. When will you write it for me to read? Fan Xian's head was full of questions. How could he still have the energy to copy Dream of the Red Chamber? He forced a smile and begged for mercy. I say, grandmother, please spare me. Seeing Lin Warner's stubborn expression of urging him to write, he didn't dare to stay in the room and dawdle. Smoke rose from his butt as he pushed open the door to hide. Fan Xian fled as if he had seen a ghost.
He made his way through the wide courtyard until he ran into a few servant girls who were covering their faces and laughing.
Only then did he feel that something was wrong. He coughed twice, trying to show the demeanor of a famous person and a famous official. But his body had not even straightened for a moment before he immediately slowed down. He gritted his teeth. Since he was young, he had decided that he wanted to live a beautiful life. Why should he care about how others looked at him? He grunted, hummed a little tune, and hopped into his study. Although his conversation with his wife was casual, he had obtained some useful information. However, Fan Xija's movements these days were indeed a little strange. Fan Xian frowned, faintly worried. Then he thought of the problem with Story of the Stone.
Only then did he remember that the Emperor of Northern Qi had sealed off the news. He owed him a favor, and it seemed that he would have to copy a chapter and send it over. However, the fact that he was the author of Story of the Stone could not be hidden for long.
He decided not to use the Overwatch Council's secret mail route. After sitting for a short while, before the light outside the room had completely dimmed, Yan Bingyun had arrived as promised. Fan Xian looked at the file he handed over and could not help but rub his temples. Today, he had first gone through the file Mutai had handed over and set the tone with Shi Chanli. Next, he had gone to the old manor to do some work. After returning to comfort his wife, he now had to talk to Sir Yen. In a short day, he had done so many things. It seemed that the so-called cultivation of a powerful official was indeed a very tiring path. I've already arrested the people you wanted me to arrest. I don't know if this will be of any help to your work. Fan Xian did not look at the file. He only asked calmly.
A while ago, the whack-a-mole seemed to have not touched upon the bureaucracy of the capital, but in reality, under the cover of a large number of redundant cases, he had carefully approached the secret power of the second prince. He had also tentatively arrested 2 officials, because Yan Bingyun believed that although the 2 officials were of low rank, they were important figures in investigating whether or not there was a relationship between the second prince and the eldest princess. Yan Bingyun sat in a chair, his expression calm. He pointed at the file in front of him. They have been arrested. Fan Xian was shocked. That fast? He was too lazy to look at the file again. The conclusion? He asked directly.
Yan Bingyun said coldly. Every year, Xinjiang smuggles a large amount of goods to northern Qi and Dongyi. On the surface, the deficit is caused by the crown prince of the Eastern Palace. But in reality, the largest amount is given to the second prince through the Ming family. It is used to bribe the officials in the court and befriend the feudal officials of various places. So your judgment is correct. The second prince is backed by the eldest princess. Fan Xian frowned. The Ming family? The in-laws of the Cui family? Exactly. Such a large amount. How did they get it from the palace treasury to the second prince? Fan Xian asked. Of course, they couldn't go through the capital. They went around Jiangnan. In the middle, a few royal merchants split it up. From bottom to top, they were all controlled by the second prince.
Yan Bingyun glanced at him.
The process is complicated. It is written in the file. If there is anything you do not understand, you can just read it. It is more complicated to say it. Fan Xian did not pay attention to the doubt in his voice about his ability. He only sank into deep thought. His judgment was correct.
He took a deep breath and said, "The man is very handsome."
Fan Xian countered with a question. The eldest princess and the second prince did it so secretly, but we easily found out. Do you think the palace doesn't know? How could our director Chen not know? Even if the palace is vigilant, they certainly do not have concrete evidence.
Yan Bingyun slowly lowered his eyes.
Don't forget, the head of the first bureau, Zhu Gu, was always the eldest princess man.
This case, if you were not in charge of the first bureau and the full cooperation of the other departments, it would have been impossible to find out.
So, the situation now is that if you really open this case, Jingdo will be in chaos. He spoke calmly, but Fan Xian could hear a glimmer of coldness behind his words.
To be able to find out so quickly, other than the terrifying resources of the Overwatch Council, a large part of it was due to Yan Bingyun's extraordinary ability.
It was clear that Yan Bingyun did not want the case he was investigating to throw the seemingly peaceful Qing court into chaos. When it came down to it, Yan Bingyun was not loyal to Fan Xian. He was loyal to the emperor, to the Qing kingdom, and to the Overwatch Council. Fan Xian glanced at him. Do you know what it means to suppress this matter?
Yan Bingyun shook his head.
I only know that if this matter is opened, your wife will be the one in the most difficult situation. In reality, most of the upper echelons knew that Fan Xian's wife was the eldest princess daughter. It was just that no one had said it.
If Fan Xian was determined to expose this matter, without question, no matter how one looked at it, the emperor in the palace would have to make an unusually valiant response.
Lin Wanner's situation would inevitably become awkward. Fan Xian's actions after returning to the capital were actually just to make up for his failure in using the paper to force the eldest princess away and ease the conflict in the palace.
The result he wanted was to force the emperor, who might have other plans, to strip away the eldest princess' power in the shortest amount of time.
I respect my wife. Fan Xian stared at Yan Bingyun with a chill. But, I will not slow down my steps because of her difficulties.
Yan Bingyun slowly raised his head.
There seemed to be some confusion in his eyes. This is something I do not understand. Sir, what exactly do you want to do? 2 reasons. Fan Xian stood up and walked to the window of the study.
He looked at the slowly sinking sun. In the corner of the courtyard, a woman was taking care of the branches and leaves of a shrub.
The first reason is very simple. The court is currently short of silver. The great river in the south has not been repaired for many years. This year, the dam has failed and hundreds of thousands of people have drowned. Although I have not personally seen it, thinking about it, it is indeed tragic, brother. Where can we find silver for disaster relief? My father has been worrying about this problem these days. The financial situation of the current dynasty is different from that of previous dynasties in history. Long years of military use have used up large amounts of money and grain. Putting aside this, the source is also very strange. A large portion of the national treasury's annual income must come from the palace treasury. The palace treasury is the emperor's treasury. In reality, you and I both know that it is the legacy of the mistress of the Yi family. It is only by relying on the endless silver produced by these industries that the Qing kingdom can be supported. Fan Xian turned his head and narrowed his eyes at Yan Bingyun. The eldest princess is a person who loves to play with power. Over the years, the silver of the palace treasury has gradually been scattered into the hands of officials in exchange for her and him loyalty and power. To put it bluntly, This is using the emperor's silver to poach the emperor's officials. The silver has been spent on internal strife and officials. In this world where silver is needed, where can we find silver? Silver is just silver. How to use it is a big problem.
Rather than letting it rot in the officials' residences, it is better to force it out and fill it in the river to scare the ghosts.
So, I am in a hurry to investigate the Xueqi family and the second prince. Otherwise, our eldest princess and the second prince, who only seems to like reading, will generously give away all the silver of the Qing kingdom. Fan Xian lowered his head slightly and seemed to feel a little emotional.
He smiled bitterly and said, "Of course, after this matter is exposed, the emperor will probably not punish his own sister.
But just like last time when she was chased out of the palace, the emperor will be afraid of gossip and carefully investigate the palace treasury. He will also give the second prince a wake-up call. But His Majesty will probably be angry and think that I am meddling in other people's business. He will kick me out of the Overwatch Council and demote me far away."
He stretched and wore a pure and innocent smile on his face.
"There is no other way. I hope the emperor will let me return to Danzhou." Yan Bingyun tilted his head slightly. His face was stiff, as if he had never known the commissioner in front of him.
He murmured, "But you will take over the palace treasury next year.
When that time comes, won't it be right and proper for you to investigate?" Fan Xian smiled and spoke as if he was talking about someone else's business. "The Qing kingdom has no surplus food.
The sooner we can stop the outflow of silver from the palace treasury, the more the people in the south can have a few more bowls of porridge to eat.
Other things can wait, but if we don't eat, we will starve."
Yan Bingyun stared at him, as if trying to see if the person in front of him was the sinister official he had thought he was, or if he was a compassionate, benevolent, and unafraid of criticism.
Chapter 271.
Don't think I'm a saint.
Fan Xian shook his head. "In the end, I'm thinking for myself. Taking over the palace treasury next year? That would be cutting off Xinyang's source of income. How could she support the prince? Could she allow such a thing to happen? The accounts of the palace treasury are clean and tidy. But what about the secret deficit? Do you want me to take it and worry until my hair turns white? Her leftovers from the feast. I don't want to hold this broken plate of food. The palace treasury is a mountain of gold, but also a basin of dirty water. The eldest princess has the Empress Dowager's favor. But what about me? As a foreign official, going to take charge of the palace treasury is a painful thing to do."
He said in distress, "I wonder if the emperor wants me to be the eldest princess's scapegoat?
In the future, when the palace treasury's deficit is investigated, I won't be able to explain it even if I had 800 mouths.
Yes, I'm not satisfied, so I'm going to take my mother-in-law's foot-washing water and pour it on herself."
If Chen Pingping or Fan Jian heard what he said and saw his expression, they would certainly give him a thumbs up and praise him for being so young, but his acting skills were already at the point of perfection. Foreign official? Foreign my ass. But Yan Bingyun did not know the shocking secret behind the scenes. Hearing Fan Xian admit to his own selfishness, he felt even more admiration in the depths of his heart. He felt that this Sir Fan Jr., who he had always disliked, was actually an upright official. He furrowed his brows and suggested, "Why didn't you reject the palace's proposal in the beginning? The palace treasury is indeed a hot potato." Fan Xian laughed somewhat self-deprecatingly. "Perhaps you won't believe me, but I really do want to do something for the people of the world." Yan Bingyun's appearance was still cold, but the warmth in his heart seemed to have warmed. He stood up and bowed to Fan Xian. He then began to use a steady voice and began to give advice from the perspective of a subordinate. "At this time, it is not worth it to touch the palace treasury." Fan Xian looked at him quietly. Yan Bingyun did not seem to feel Fan Xian's aggressive gaze. Because even if this matter is revealed, looking at Sir's recent plans, perhaps he will have the guts to ask Sir Chanli to write an official document and post it on the Supreme Court's wall, letting everyone know how much the eldest princess and the officials in the capital have benefited from the palace treasury. Fan Xian laughed self-deprecatingly. He really did have this plan.
In any case, he was bold and had a strong backer, and this backer was not the emperor, but that uncle.
"It's useless," Yan Bingyun said seriously. "At least for this year's victims, it is useless. The silver that has flowed out of the palace treasury cannot be recovered in a short month. Let's not talk about whether the emperor can make up his mind and offend most of the officials. If there are too many officials to be demoted, the court will have problems operating. The disaster relief cannot be delayed. Fan Xian sank into deep thought and asked, "Then what do you think?" "Put this case on hold for the time being. The minister has been in charge of the national treasury for a long time. He must have his own ways. I don't think he will delay the disaster in the south." Yan Bingyun said quietly, "The things that Sir has arranged in northern Qi also need some time to prepare. After the winter, the council will coordinate with Wang Qinian in the north and south. First, we will uproot the Cui family and cut off Xinyang's path of distribution. Then, we will take advantage of the commissioner's new control of the palace treasury to investigate the accounts and cases. This is the way to be prudent." Fan Xian frowned. "I am just worried that Wang Qinian's time in Shangjing is too short. He cannot completely control the power in the north and uproot the Cui family." Yan Bingyun paused for a moment, then simply replied, "I can help." Fan Xian looked at him. His expression did not change, but he was secretly delighted. "You are now a famous person in northern Qi. How can you go back north?" Yan Bingyun replied, "The men under me do not need me to watch over them. I will try to grasp more and more power, and then use this power to do things that I want to do. In this process, I will need the help of many people." Fan Xian looked into his eyes and said in a low voice, "I really want to be like when we were in Shangjing. You and I can work well together. Of course, not just this time, but also next spring." Yan Bingyun understood what he meant. He did not stay silent for long. He lowered his head, saluted, and left. The young and handsome men of the Overwatch Council were not sloppy people. However, after Sir Yan Jr. expressed sufficient trust in Sir Fan Jr., he still turned his head back and asked in confusion before he stepped out of the study, "Commissioner, you have lived in luxury since you were a child. Why do you place so much importance on the common people who suffer in the world?" Fan Xian scratched his head and replied, "Perhaps it is because I have long since gotten used to doing good deeds. Sir Yan Jr. is very patient. He still hasn't asked how Miss Shen is doing." He looked out the window at the half-cut shrubs under the setting sun. His face was expressionless, but he sighed to himself. The officialdom was indeed treacherous at every step. Even the Fan manor he lived in had such a skilled spy. Although Fan Xian had officially revealed his identity as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council to the Ministry of Justice, and the first bureau's secret agent had tactfully revealed his identity and left, the courtyard was still not quiet. If it weren't for Wu Zhu behind him, he probably wouldn't have noticed the woman planting flowers. Just as he had said, Fan Xian was not a saint, nor was he a good person in the purest sense of the word, and he was certainly not a traitor. The simplest reason for dealing with the eldest princess, as well as the unknown second prince, was because he and Xinyang had long had enmity that could not be solved. And the root of this enmity, the palace treasury, was the thing that Fan Xian would not give up after his rebirth. The palace treasury was the Yi family, and the meaning it carried was something that Fan Xian had no choice but to protect. No matter who tried to stand in his way, Fan Xian would mercilessly kick them aside. But what he had said to Yan Bingyun was not all an act. It was just like what he had said to his sister a long time ago. How should a person live their life? How should Fan Xian live his life? Love himself, love his wife, love his family, love the world, love his own, and love for others. This was not the influence of the AI television station, but purely from his own heart. Muddle-headed, glory, wealth, bullying men and women, this was a life. Honest, wronged, precarious life, this was a life. Leading troops into battle, killing people like scything flax, and unifying the world was a life. Fan Xian was also an ordinary male animal who coveted wealth, enjoyed power, and loved beautiful women. But the experience of 2 lives had allowed him to accurately grasp what he wanted, so he believed that being free and easy, being cruel when it was time to be cruel, being gentle when it was time to be gentle, being close to more beautiful women, earning more money, and seeing more of the beautiful scenery of this world was the way to live a glorious life. On the premise that his life and material life were guaranteed, he did not mind enjoying his spiritual world. But for the world to be beautiful, it first had to make the people who lived in it smile. So Fan Xian, the poor official, inevitably felt a little tired at the beginning. If he had maintained the clear and murderous state of mind of the youth from Danzhou, perhaps he would have become a lot more free and happy. The palace treasury and the people of the world would not have made him think too much.
But in the spring of the 4th year of the Qing calendar, that bit of unnecessary curiosity about his fiancée made him fall into the river of love, into family and deeper.
He could no longer live freely in this world. This fact tells us that as a man, getting married too early is always a very stupid thing to do.
That afternoon, Fan Xian, the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, and Yan Bingyun, the alternate head of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, had a conversation in Fan Manor about the palace treasury, the second prince, and the people of the people.
The contents of this conversation were quickly sent through the most secretive channel of the Qing kingdom to the royal study in the royal palace and to Chen Pingping's table. Chen Pingping's reaction was very simple. He immediately wrote an order, temporarily delegating his authority over the entire council to Fan Xian. In other words, before Chen Pingping retracted this order, Fan Xian could legitimately mobilize all the power of the enormous and terrifying Overwatch Council.
And in the royal study, the Supreme Emperor of the Qing Kingdom looked at the report on the table and only nodded lightly.
In His Majesty's heart, he was very pleased with Fan Xian's actions these past few days. Since the officials and the people of the world all believed the Overwatch Council to be his dog, then this dog must have the courage and ruthlessness to bite people, but it must not bite anyone it met. By making Fan Xian the dog's leash, the emperor wanted to see just how capable he was. After the conversation with Chen Pingping 9 months ago, although the emperor did not say anything, he had tacitly agreed to the fact that Fan Xian had taken over the Overwatch Council. In the future, he would have to let the child know his true identity as the son of the emperor, but because of his birth, he could never sit on the throne. Presumably, the child would be very satisfied with this arrangement. Of course, His Majesty appreciated this afternoon's conversation between Fan Xian and Yan Bingyun even more. The emotions that naturally flowed through the conversation were very similar to that woman from back then. A trace of a gratified smile flashed across the emperor's thin face. Although the child's words were somewhat disrespectful toward him, he could guess the loyalty beneath those words. He looked at the eunuch in front of him and smiled.
Hong Xiang, what do you think of this?
Fan Xian? Eunuch Hong bowed slightly.
There was not a trace of emotion on his aged face.
Too fake.
The emperor furrowed his brows and didn't say anything.
He wondered if Fan Xian was putting on an act for him to see.
However, he had heard that the 5th prince had always been in the south.
No one in the capital should have been able to detect his arrangements. Your Majesty, how should we handle this? Eunuch Hong asked naturally, about the matter between the 2nd prince and the eldest princess. The emperor coldly shook his head. The play hasn't even begun. How can it be stopped so soon? This emperor of the kingdom of Qing had always been troubled by the emptiness of the national treasury. Although he had always had his suspicions about Xinjiang, he had never found any concrete evidence.
And because of the Empress Dowager's health, the emperor, who had always been loyal and filial, could not ferociously tear open everything under the curtains. After all, Li Yunrui had done more for the kingdom of Qing than he had done wrong. After all, the 2nd prince was his own son. It was only now that he truly believed Chen Pingping's words. In some matters, although young people could appear a little rash, they could also display sufficient ability and boldness. Not to mention Fan Xian, it seemed that the emperor had not paid enough attention to the young official named Yan Bingyun. The serving girls lit the candles and left. The royal study was silent. The emperor quietly waited for Fan Xian's memorial. If Fan Xian had truly guessed his intentions and was willing to follow his arrangements to be a lonely official, then by tonight at the latest, he should have found out and delivered the information to the emperor's desk.
And if Fan Xian really did as Yan Bingyun wanted and suppressed this matter, the emperor frowned.
Even if Fan Xian was considering things for the stability of the court, as the emperor, he could not allow such deception.
With a creak, the door to the royal study opened. A eunuch walked in carrying 2 boxes of memorials.
The emperor had always been diligent.
Reading memorials until late at night had already become a rule in the royal palace. The emperor's expression did not change, but he was waiting for something in his heart. When he saw the secret memorial box at the very bottom, a warm smile appeared on his lips. He opened the Overwatch Council's special secret memorial box and began to carefully read the first memorial Fan Xian had written since entering officialdom. The secret memorial. After a long time, he put the memorial to the candle and burned it. He gently coughed, picked up the red brush, and wrote 2 words on a piece of white paper. He then sealed it back into the secret memorial box. In his heart, this memorial, which could change the fate of many people,
was not a big deal. On the road to the pinnacle of power, the emperor had already seen through many things.
It was different from what many factions, including Fan Xian, secretly guessed. He did not care at all about how his son and sister would make a fuss, because no one could truly understand the emperor's ambition and confidence. But the emperor was very satisfied with Fan Xian's performance because he knew that Fan Xian was not standing on the Eastern Palace's side to attack the second prince.
So when the emperor, who was comforted, began to read the memorial at the back, his thin face suddenly showed incomparable anger and disdain.
The Imperial Censorate collectively accused Fan Xian, the commissioner of the Overwatch Council and head of the First Bureau, of corruption, taking bribes, and arrogance. The memorials were like pairs of provocative eyes staring at the emperor's gloomy face. Chapter 272.
In the entire capital, the first person to know that the Imperial Censorate had collectively impeached Fan Xian, a popular figure of the court, was none other than Fan Xian himself. When His Majesty had not seen those memorials, Fan Xian knew that he was already standing at the heart of the storm. Mu Tai sat in the chair opposite Fan Xian and said, "Last night, the Imperial Censor of the left, Lai Mingqing, led the way. Because of the confirmation process, it was only sent here today." The First Bureau of the Overwatch Council was responsible for secretly monitoring the movements of the officials. If the officials of the First Bureau could not immediately find out about such a large movement, Fan Xian was afraid that he would be so angry that he would start a second rectification. He nodded and flicked the paper in his hand.
"Are these the charges?" he asked curiously. Mu Tai realized that the commissioner did not seem to care. He could not help but frown. "Sir, you cannot underestimate them. After all..." He stopped talking. Fan Xian raised his head and looked at him. There was a hint of mockery in his eyes. "Do you think that I am worthy of these charges?"
The memorials of the Imperial Censor and the Imperial Censor clearly stated that in the short month that Fan Xian had been in charge of the First Bureau, he had accepted a large amount of silver from many people.
At the same time, he had released a large number of suspects. He had also allowed his subordinates to commit violent acts on the streets. The last matter was related to the reputation of the court, while the first two were actual charges. The banknotes that Lady Lu had handed over to Fan Xian were all well documented, and the officials who had been arrested by the First Bureau and then released could not be hidden from the world. These charges were enough to make any official step down. Fan Xian rubbed the spot between his eyebrows.
He had been busy all day, and now he had encountered such a major event in the middle of the night.
He was rather annoyed. The Imperial Censorate of the Qing court, the Imperial Censorate, has the skin of a duck and the heart of a sheep. When did they become so unafraid of the rich and powerful? Or is it that I do not have enough power? That my status is not high enough? Hearing this, Mu Tai could not help but want to laugh. The Overwatch Council had always looked down on the Imperial Censorate, but he forcibly suppressed his laughter. He thought that the commissioner's last two rhetorical questions were asking a question he already knew the answer to. In Jingdo, Fan Xian Jr.'s power was high and noble, and everyone knew that. This was something that Fan Xian did not understand. Why did the Imperial Censorate censors have the courage to offend him for no reason? These days, his methods had been gentle, and it seemed that he had not offended these people. Furthermore, these days, he had gradually gained the emperor's favor. Were these people not afraid of making the emperor unhappy? Mu Tai looked at his face and knew what he was thinking.
He explained, "Sir, this is the usual practice of the Imperial Censorate.
They have always acted against the Overwatch Council. The law of Qing gives them this authority, and His Majesty has always suppressed the Overwatch Council's secret methods. So every few days, those poor scholars will always find fault with the Overwatch Council, but..." He frowned. "I didn't think they would have the guts to directly target you, sir, and with such heavy crimes." Fan Xian reached his hand into the teacup and dipped it into a few drops of cold tea. He carefully rubbed it between his brows. The glimmer of brightness calmed him slightly. The Imperial Censorate was a very special organization. In the previous dynasty, the Imperial Censorate was the highest monitoring, impeachment, and suggestion organization in the royal court. The senior officers were the left and right imperial censors, and below them were the deputy imperial censors and the deputy imperial censors. According to local jurisdiction, there were also imperial censors, who patrolled the prefectures and counties. They were responsible for investigating and impeaching officials. In Zhuang Mohan's official commentary, it was written about the imperial censorate of the Wei dynasty. The imperial censorate is responsible for impeaching the 100 officials, distinguishing between injustice and injustice, supervising the various departments, and acting as the emperor's eyes and ears. Officials who are treacherous, petty, and tyrannical are impeached. Officials who are wretched, corrupt, and corrupt are impeached. Scholars who are not correct in their studies, who write to change the constitution and hope to be employed, impeach. In the event of a pilgrimage or an inspection, the Ministry of Appointments is impeached. The prisoners of the Great Prison are impeached outside the court, along with the Ministry of Justice and Dali. They follow orders from the interior, and follow orders from the outside, each acting according to their orders. The 13 imperial censors are in charge of investigating and correcting corrupt officials in the internal and external departments. They are impeached in person, or sealed. And the imperial censorate is responsible for the constitution. The imperial censorate of the Qing kingdom was far from the glory of the previous dynasty. It had removed the imperial censors from patrolling the various counties, and the power to investigate cases was transferred to the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court. Most of the power, such as monitoring the various counties and secretly monitoring officials, had been transferred to the Overwatch Council that Chen Pingping had single-handedly established. Now, it was only the emperor's eyes and ears. It had an empty mouth, but no real power. What kind of people were officials? They were men. What did men like most? Other than beautiful women, there was power. So the imperial censorate felt a glimmer of envy and hatred towards the Overwatch Council, which had taken away most of their power. Perhaps these scholars still missed the glory of the imperial censorate in the distant past, so they relied on their right to speak up to impeach the officials of the Overwatch Council from time to time. But with Chen Pingping's poisonous eyes watching, these imperial censors had been quiet for a long time. Why did these imperial censors suddenly rise in revolt? Fan Xian pondered this carefully. The Overwatch Council was the most powerful of the Overwatch Council, but that did not mean the imperial censorate had lost its influence on the court. Even the eldest princess had been forced out of the palace by Fan Xian's thousands of verbal papers. One could imagine that words were enough to kill an official. Most of the imperial censorate came from humble backgrounds, and were greatly supported by the scholars. In the past, when an imperial censor submitted a petition, it would always be echoed by the scholars. After a round of verbal attacks, the court would always investigate. Even if there were no results in the end, the official covered in filth would never be able to stand upright in court again. Fan Xian laughed coldly. His mind turned, and he knew where the problem was. It seemed that the Overwatch Council's secret investigation of Xinyang and the second prince had already been leaked. He remembered clearly that the former imperial censor of the left, who had been ordered by the eldest princess to break his legs in the Ministry of Justice, was a pretty boy raised by the eldest princess. And the great scholar He Zhongwei, whom he had been secretly investigating, was also in the imperial censorate. Not long after, the secret memorial sent to the palace received a reply. Fan Xian looked at the box wrapped in a golden silk handkerchief and shook his head. Opening it, there was only a piece of white paper inside. On the white paper there were 2 words. Nji. Fan Xian's surname was Fan, and his given name was Nji. Now, he could naturally guess that this name was probably given to him by the emperor himself. He couldn't help but frown, unsure of what the emperor meant. When he submitted the secret petition, he knew that the emperor would temporarily suppress the matter of the palace treasury deficit. But the sudden accusation from the imperial censorate made him misunderstand. He thought that the emperor wanted him to swallow his anger. I can't Nji. Fan Xian shook his head and said to Mu Tai, investigate those imperial censors who consider themselves to be honest. Since they have petitioned me to take bribes and bend the law, then I have to reciprocate. It's impolite. Mu Tai was a little surprised. Director Chen once said that when it comes to the imperial censorate's petitions, it's like listening to a dog barking. Ignore it. Because the palace does not want the Overwatch Council to investigate the imperial censorate, it would not look good. And in order to open up more avenues of speech, the emperor has never given the Overwatch Council the power to arrest the imperial censors. Fan Xian spat. This time, they're not just barking. They're already opening their mouths to bite me. Who cares about the face of the court? I told you to investigate, And when the problem is found, I won't do it myself. Of course, I'll throw it to the Supreme Court and the Ministry of Justice. Even if the emperor doesn't accept it, what's the use of that wall outside the first bureau? Mutai was very happy. The people of the Overwatch Council had been waiting for this day.
They accepted the order and left the manor in high spirits.
They went to arrange for spies to investigate the imperial censors for any illegal activities. The next day, Fan Xian played mahjong at home and enjoyed a good day of rain. He didn't take the impeachment of the imperial censors seriously. Wanner and Ruoruo, who heard the news from him, were a little worried. Everyone knew the importance of an official's reputation. It wasn't until the news of the imperial censor's impeachment had spread throughout the capital, and the Hall of Governmental Affairs had already copied the memorials and sent them to Fan Manor, that Fan Xian pretended to know about the matter. His face was full of shock and anger, but he still slept soundly that night. Early in the morning on the third day, Fan Xian left the manor. According to the rules, an official who was impeached by the imperial censors had to put down what they were doing and submit a memorial to defend themselves. But he didn't follow the rules. Instead, he went to Xinfeng restaurant and led a family to attack the delicious Jietong buns. This matter had already caused a huge uproar in Jingdo. No one knew what kind of method he, the current popular figure of the court, would choose to retaliate. This was because this time, the imperial censors had clearly come prepared in their collective petition. They firmly held on to the accusation of impeachment. Even the officials who had been in and out of Jingdo this month were clearly investigated. But no one expected that Commissioner Fan didn't attack the imperial censors. Instead, he attacked the meat buns. On the fourth day, the continuous rain finally stopped. Fan Xian led a family to the outskirts to admire the chrysanthemums. Before the rest of the world, he used his fingers to get close to the little daisies that had just bloomed. Logically speaking, at this time, the Hall of Governmental Affairs should have brought out the Emperor's edict. To investigate or not to investigate? To ask or not to ask?
Regardless of whether it was to wake up Sir Fan Jr., who had risen too quickly this year, or to harshly rebuke the imperial censors who were too meddlesome, the emperor had to have an attitude. During the court discussion, the Minister of Appointments, Yan Hangshu, finally couldn't resist the curiosity in his heart and carefully asked. He didn't know that the emperor only grunted through his nose and didn't respond at all. The scene was stuck in an awkward stalemate. The imperial censors' faces of justice and solemnity gradually turned into awkwardness. They planned to jointly submit a memorial again. They were also prepared to draw in their peers among the civil officials in court. At the same time, they were going to mobilize the students of the Imperial College.
Chapter 273. The Emperor of the Qing Kingdom was actually waiting for Fan Xian's self-defense memorial. He had planned on casually fooling around a bit and getting this matter over with. Any emperor in a golden age was actually very good at this kind of smoothing over the mud. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian continued to ignore it and put on an appearance of a clear conscience as he wandered around and threw this question back at him. He thought sinisterly to himself, "Don't you want me to bite someone? As the emperor, you have to protect me. If I have to be disgraced over such a small matter, then in the future, when I really do move against Xinyang and take care of the eldest princess, won't you throw me to the Empress Dowager to eat?" If he had been a normal favored official or civil official, he would not have been as harsh and angry as Fan Xian. It was said that the emperor's heart was hard to fathom, and the might of heaven was unpredictable. As an official, if he became arrogant because he was favored, who knew when the emperor would remember that he had sat in his carriage and cut him down with a knife? But Fan Xian knew that he was not a normal official, and the emperor did not know that he knew. So, this matter was a bit interesting. He was testing the extent to which the emperor could go for him. On the seventh day after the imperial censors collectively submitted their memorial, Fan Xian sat in a carriage outside the palace gates. When he got off the carriage, the officials of the Qinian unit surrounded him and guarded him in the center. His black and gray clothing, cold expression, and tall and straight figure all made clear his identity. The officials gathered at the palace gates saw this scene and knew that this was the person that the officials often discussed after meals. Not to mention anything else, but when it came to placing spies out in the open to protect him, Fan Xian was the best in the Overwatch Council. Today was the day of the court conference, and the emperor had specially summoned Fan Xian to the palace to listen. All of the officials knew what was going to be discussed today, and they couldn't help but feel excited. A few civil officials who were on good terms with the Fan family came over and exchanged a few words with Fan Xian. Using the cold weather as an excuse, they went back to the side of the palace gates. At this moment, on both sides of the square, there were only 5 or 6 officials wearing crimson robes and Fan Xian's black-robed Overwatch Council officials. The two sides stood facing each other, but their gazes seemed to pierce through each other's ranks and shoot toward the city in the distance. The officials dressed in crimson robes were the censors from the Imperial Censorate who had written to impeach Fan Xian. Fan Xian looked at them coldly. Lowering his voice, he said, "All of you look like pigs, yet you're still upright officials." Deng Ziyu said in a low voice, "The first bureau has been investigating for a few days, but they really didn't find anything. Sir, most of the Imperial Censorate come from humble backgrounds and value their reputation the most. This is the only thing they can rely on. Even the gatekeeper has to be careful when receiving gifts. It is indeed difficult to find anything." Fan Xian furrowed his brows and sighed. If the officials are not greedy, the world is in trouble. Deng Ziyu smiled bitterly, thinking that the commissioner's clever words were a bit absurd. The Imperial Censorate looked at Fan Xian coldly. There was not a trace of fear in their eyes. Fan Xian knew that the other party was not afraid of him. He smiled bitterly. If the officials were not greedy, what use would he be as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council? The other party was an imperial censor. He could not send a few subordinates to assassinate him. If that happened, no matter what the emperor did, he could only chase him back to Danzhou. Fan Xian understood that the rarest thing in this world was upright officials. Furthermore, he believed in the investigative abilities of the First Bureau. The people in front of him must be truly upright officials. But he also understood that the most terrifying thing in this world was upright officials swarming up and becoming your enemy. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but admire his young and beautiful mother-in-law. To be able to use these upright officials who were not greedy or corrupt, she really did have some skill. While Fan Xian was sighing to himself, he did not know that the Imperial Censorate were looking at the commissioner and sighing to themselves. Clearly, Fan Xian's actions over the past month all showed the true nature of the immortal poet he hid behind. He was a corrupt official, and he was also a sprouting of a powerful official with money and power. They had enough evidence, but why did the emperor still not say anything? They were not worried that the emperor would heavily punish them for shielding Fan Xian. On one hand, they deeply believed that the emperor was a wise ruler. On the other hand, what did the imperial censor do? He shouldered justice with iron shoulders and admonished with iron bones. Even if he died, so what? They only hoped that the white bones would leave a lingering fragrance. But the Imperial Censorate did not fare well these past few days. First of all, their connections with the court had no effect. No matter which department the official came from, once they heard the purpose of their visit, they remained courteous on the surface, but refused to join them in writing. Second, the public opinion of the common people had not been mobilized. The scholars who had been wantonly criticizing the court in the past, upon hearing that the person they wanted to impeach was Fan Xian, shook their heads in disbelief. And what angered the Imperial Censorate the most was the attitude of the young people in the Imperial College. The Imperial Censor who had gone to the Imperial College to mobilize the students was kicked out in the end. No one believed that the immortal poet Zhuang Mohan's designated successor, the son of the Minister of Revenue, the idol of a generation of young scholars, and the dream lover of countless girls, would be so immoral as to covet such a small amount of silver. 13,400 liang. Just a small amount of silver? Perhaps the Imperial Censorate were used to being poor, so this was the thing they could not understand. At this time, a sudden gust of morning wind blew past, making the officials guarding outside the palace feel refreshed. Immediately after, their expressions changed. They looked at the cloud of rain floating in the morning light and hid inside the palace gate. The imperial guards and eunuchs did not dare let these high-ranking officials get drenched in the rain, so they did not stop them. In autumn, the capital often changed its face, and after the wind came the rain. An autumn rain floated down solemnly. It went from light to dripping, and in the time it took to take a few breaths, the green stone floor in the palace was immediately soaked, revealing a thick black color. At this time, outside the palace gate, only Fan Xian and the Imperial Censorate stood there. The rain poured on them, but they did not react at all. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at them. Suddenly he said, "Imperial Censor Lai, Go hide from the rain. He called out to the imperial censor of the left, a third-rank official, Lai Mingqing. Censor Lai looked at him coldly and said, Master Fan, do you think being drenched in the rain will be enough to wash away your sins? Imperial censor Lai cupped his hands. Today, when I see the emperor, I will definitely impeach Master Fan. Fan Xian's eyebrows twitched. This imperial censor was very cunning, he thought. He smiled and cupped his hands. Is that so? But I don't know if a member of the royal family really broke the law. Would Master Lai have the same heroic spirit you have today? The imperial censor of the left was so angry that he did not want to speak. He waved his sleeves and walked toward the palace gate. Behind him, the imperial censorates knelt in the rain, playing the game of kneeling at the palace gate. Fan Xian felt that these people were both pitiful and funny. He sighed. Life is only for fame. I really don't know why the court keeps you people. The kneeling imperial censorates stared back at him angrily. Fan Xian turned a blind eye to them. He lifted the rain hat behind him to cover his head. He smiled. I am black. No matter how I wash, I will always be black. Although you are all red, after being washed by the rain, you have turned black. The rain slid down his Overwatch Council robe. The robe was smooth and did not leak water. The black was still that gloomy black. After the imperial censorate's robes were soaked by the rain, the color gradually darkened, and gradually became closer to black. The imperial censorates looked down at their own clothes. They allowed the rain to hit their faces, but they stubbornly remained silent. After all the important matters of the court had been discussed, the emperor seemed to see imperial censor of the left, Lai Mingqing, and commissioner of the Overwatch Council Fan Xian. His brows furrowed in annoyance. He had the eunuch summon the two of them and coldly said, Speak in front of the court officials. The imperial censor of the left adjusted his robes and said in a clear voice, Everything I have said is in the memorial. Please, your majesty, quickly investigate this case to cleanse the court and appease the grievances of the common people. The emperor turned his head to look at Fan Xian. Why have you never submitted your memorial to the Hall of Governmental Affairs? Fan Xian bowed respectfully. I did not write a memorial. The emperor angrily rebuked him. How arrogant! The imperial censor of the imperial censorate is the first to impeach 100 officials like you. Don't think your family has been loyal for generations. Just because you have done a great service to the country and are famous in the world, I can't bear to punish you. Fan Xian knew that the emperor was angry because he had been silent all this time. He was angry because he had thrown the topic to him. He apologized. I really did not know I had to write a memorial to defend myself. I am guilty. The emperor's expression softened. Considering that you have just entered officialdom, and Fan Jian is busy with work, and that old thing Chen Pingping will not teach you these things, I will forgive you this time. Today, I summon you to the palace. I want to hear how you will defend yourself and explain yourself to the court officials. Fan Xian's expression showed that he was in a difficult position. A moment later, he hesitantly opened his mouth. I really do not know how to defend myself. The emperor's expression immediately darkened. Then you admit to your crimes? He asked. Fan Xian suddenly raised his head. His expression showed bitterness. Long live, I do not admit to my crimes. The reason why I do not defend myself is because the imperial censorate's accusations are absurd and without reason. I do not know the truth, and I do not know who is involved in this so-called bribery and perverting the law. I do not know how to defend myself. Chapter 274. The officials were in an uproar. No one had expected Fan Xian to be so stubborn as to refuse to defend himself. The face of the Minister of Appointments, Yan Hangshu, darkened. Just as he was about to say something, he looked up and saw that the few superior-ranked officials in front of him were all silent. Only then did he remember that things were definitely not so simple. The head of the Bureau of Military Affairs, General Qin, had his white beard swaying in the wind. His old eyes were half closed, as if he had fallen asleep. Yan Hangshu glanced down. General Qin's son, Qin Heng, was also keeping his mouth shut. He no longer had the courage to suggest Fan Xian go to northern Qi in the early spring. It was only right for the military to remain silent. On one hand, they had a good relationship with the Overwatch Council. On the other hand, This was an invasion of the Jingdo bureaucracy, and they had no need to intervene. But the head of the civil officials, Xu the scholar, also had a respectful expression. It was as if he had not heard the conversation in front of the palace. The ministers had all turned into clay statues. Yan Hangshu thought about it. It seemed that there was no need to offend Fan Xian for the sake of the eldest princess, who was far away in Xinyang. So he also kept his mouth shut. Seeing that no officials had spoken up to reprimand Fan Xian, the emperor's expression did not soften. A cold light flashed through his eyes. He stared at Fan Xian and said, "If you do not defend yourself, then let's hear what Minister Lai has to say." The imperial censor of the left, Lai Mingqing, accepted the edict and stepped forward. He read out all of Fan Xian's illegal actions in the memorials. Stroke by stroke it was clear. Fan Xian groaned in his heart. This imperial censor of the left was indeed surnamed Lai. Why did he have to blame everything on him? What did the bribe from the first bureau have to do with him? The court was filled with discussion. The gazes that were directed at Lai Mingqing and Fan Xian became somewhat strange. Among the matters that the imperial censorate was investigating, the one that bore the brunt was that eunuch Dai was suspected of bribing the commissioner of the Overwatch Council on behalf of his nephew, Dai Zhen. The officials thought, how dare a rogue like you drag this matter into the palace? On the other hand, they looked down on Fan Xian. This was such a great opportunity, and yet he had only accepted 1,000 liang of silver from eunuch Dai. Who among the elders in court would be in the mood to accept such a small amount of money? Hearing that the matter involved the palace, the emperor's expression did not change. He directly ordered the guards to summon Lady Xu and eunuch Dai from the palace to the court for a confrontation. Although the officials knew that this kind of investigation method was a bit ridiculous, they all knew that the emperor was not a person who was bound by conventional rules and regulations. In addition, they were also curious about how this matter would turn out, so they all kept quiet. Not long after, eunuch Dai was led into the palace. He had long known what would be discussed in court today. He was anxious and puzzled. He had only given the banknotes to Yi Gui Pin. Her personality was cheerful, but she had always kept her mouth shut. Furthermore, she was Fan Xian's relative, so how could she have sold him out? How did this news get to the imperial censorate? After entering the palace, eunuch Dai first cried, "Long live the emperor," and then cried, "I have been wronged." Eunuch Dai rubbed his buttocks, and tears streamed down his face as he kowtowed to the emperor. His Majesty has always forbidden the servants of the palace from communicating with the officials. I am timid, and I dare not break the rules. Speaking of Sir Fan Jr., I have indeed heard of his name, because... Eunuch Dai looked pitifully at the emperor on the throne. Everyone in the world knows the great name of the immortal Fan Xian. Although I am a cripple, I am still a cripple of the kingdom of Qing. When I heard that Sir Fan Jr. had gone to northern Qi to bring glory to His Majesty, I was naturally happy. It was inevitable that Sir Fan Jr. would be mentioned in our daily conversations. But I have never even seen Sir Fan Jr. How could I have bribed him? The imperial censor of the left, Lai Mingqing, asked coldly, "Eunuch Dai, have you really never seen Commissioner Fan?" Eunuch Dai's knees hurt from kneeling, and he had long since cursed the meddlesome censor countless times in his heart. Hearing the question, he suddenly seemed to realize something. I remember now. Last year, when I delivered the imperial edict to Fan Manor, I saw Sir Fan Jr. once. But at the time, it was to deliver the edict, so I left as soon as I entered the door. If that counts as a meeting, it would only be once. Eunuch Dai then wailed and swore to the heavens. Long live the emperor, I have only seen Sir Fan Jr. once. If I have seen him again, let my intestines be torn apart and I die a horrible death. I will still be a eunuch in my next life. This was a vicious oath, and His Majesty cursed angrily. What nonsense are you spouting? Imperial Censor Lai, on the other hand, looked slightly worried. He said, bribery doesn't necessarily mean that both parties must meet. Eunuch Dai, let me ask you, do you have a distant nephew called Dai Zhen, who is a minor official in the Vegetable Inspection Department at the entrance of Dengshiku? Eunuch Dai did not dare to hide anything and nodded. Imperial Censor Lai reported seriously, Your Majesty, that Dai Zhen is a corrupt. He recounted everything that had happened in the first bureau of the Overwatch Council, then stared at Fan Xian and said coldly, Commissioner Fan, may I ask where this Dai Zhen is now? Fan Xian thought for a moment, then replied, "The case has been closed." After this low-ranking official Dai Zhan spat out the stolen money, he was stripped of his position. "I do not know where he is now." Imperial Censor Lai said coldly. "You do not know? It was you who took bribes from eunuch Dai and broke the law. That Dai Zhan has been in the Vegetable Inspection Department for 6 years, and who knows how much money he has embezzled from the palace. Commissioner, you say you do not know, and then strip him of his position, taking only a small amount of money and then letting him go." "I do not know what is going on." Fan Xian calmly replied. "The council has investigated and found that Dai Zhan has embezzled 472 taels of silver in 6 years. According to the third rule of Qing law, if the amount is less than 500 taels of silver, he will be stripped of his position and given a fine. There is no need to transfer him to the Ministry of Justice. The case has been closed, and Dai Zhan has been stripped of his position and fined 1,000 taels of silver. What does Imperial Censor Lai think is wrong? And what is going on?" Dai Zhan's case had been investigated by the Overwatch Council. As for how much he had embezzled, it was up to Fan Xian. Imperial Censor Lai was so angry that he laughed. 472 taels of silver? Could it be that Commissioner Fan is trying to deceive the court officials without eyes? Fan Xian laughed. Of course, Dai Zhan has also embezzled some vegetables and fruits. According to the rules, they should be converted into silver. If that is the case, then it is indeed the council that has not been meticulous enough. Imperial Censor Lai's advice is reasonable, and I thank you. Imperial Censor Lai saw that Fan Xian was being unreasonable and shouted angrily, "How dare you! In these 6 years, Dai Zhan has embezzled at least 4,000 taels of silver. The people are boiling with anger, and Commissioner Fan is trying to cover it up. What are you trying to do?" The court was silent. The only thing that could be heard was the Imperial Censor's angry questioning. Fan Xian slowly raised his head and glanced at the Imperial Censor with a slightly cold gaze. He took a light step forward. Imperial Censor Lai saw the coldness on his handsome face, and for a moment, he was intimidated and unconsciously took a step back. Fan Xian stared into his eyes and suddenly said, word by word, "What are you trying to do? The people are boiling with anger?" He took a deep breath and said mockingly, "Dare I ask Imperial Censor Lai, as the Imperial Censor of the Imperial Censor, you have the responsibility of reporting to the public. Since you keep saying that Dai Zhan has embezzled so much silver, and the people are boiling with anger, then in these 6 years, why has the Imperial Censor not mentioned this? Are you the official who is trying to cover up Dai Zhan's crimes? The people are boiling with anger. Why don't you ask the capital's magistrate to arrest him?" He suddenly became angry, and all the officials in the court were stunned. Fan Xian didn't give Imperial Censor Lai a chance to speak. In a cold voice he said, "I have been in charge of the first bureau for less than a month, and I have already found out about Dai Zhan's embezzlement. In these 6 years, Imperial Censor Lai knew that Dai Zhan's people were boiling with anger, but he didn't say a word and acted like a mute. The Overwatch Council investigated the case, and it became a mistake. The Imperial Censors were mute for 6 whole years. Mute for 6 years. Now you say that the Overwatch Council is corrupt." Fan Xian bowed to the Emperor on the dragon throne, and turned around to ask Imperial Censor Lai angrily, "I would like to ask you, sir, what are you trying to do?" The barrage of questions stunned the Imperial Censor of the left. He knew that he had said something wrong, and now Fan Xian had something to use against him. If he admitted that the Imperial Censor had no knowledge of Dai Zhan's embezzlement, then Fan Xian could say that Dai Zhan had only embezzled 400 taels of silver, and there was no way he could overturn the case. In a fit of anger, he had said that Dai Zhan had embezzled a lot of money, and the people were angry, but he had fallen into Fan Xian's trap. As an Imperial Censor, if he knew about this, then why hadn't he done anything for 6 years? Why did he have to jump out to impeach the person who investigated the case when the Overwatch Council was investigating the case? After Fan Xian pointed out this fact, it became evidence that the Imperial Censor was jealous of the Overwatch Council, and had falsely accused the Overwatch Council. The officials in the court looked at Imperial Censor Lai with hostility, but they looked at Sir Fan Xian with admiration. These old foxes knew the root of the matter, but Fan Xian had dug a hole in the court, and Imperial Censor Lai had jumped in. This skill and accuracy made these old foxes feel a little afraid. This was not like a young man who had been in the bureaucracy for less than a year. Everyone sighed in their hearts. Fan Xian could write poetry, fight, and now be an official. They really didn't know how Fan Jian, that old money grubber, could be so lucky to have raised such a good illegitimate son.
The imperial censor of the left was so angry that his lips trembled. He waved his sleeves and knelt before the emperor. In a raspy voice he said, "Your Majesty, please punish me severely."
But Commissioner Fan's abuse of the law is not something that your Majesty can easily forgive. Let the Supreme Court investigate carefully, and I am sure they will find something.
The emperor had long since grown impatient.
Seeing Fan Xian's behavior, a glimmer of joy flashed in his eyes. Immediately he said impatiently, all right. You are the imperial censor of the left. It is normal that you do not know about the corruption of a lowly official. There is no need to punish him. Just remember, in the future, do not exaggerate this matter in court, and use the people's anger to talk about it. I am not the emperor of Northern Wei or Northern Qi, and the kingdom of Qing is not that kind of country. In the future, do not do such things. Do not do such things again? Lai Mingqing was ashamed and angry. He would rather die than accept this kind of reputation. Gritting his teeth, he knelt on the ground and kowtowed again and again. Chapter 275. The sound of kowtowing rang out in the vast palace hall. In a moment, blood had already appeared on the forehead of the imperial censor of the left, Lai Mingqing. The emperor looked at him with some disgust and waved his hand for the guards to bring him down. Only then did he lightly sweep his gaze over Fan Xian. Commissioner Fan, as a member of the Overwatch Council, you have great privileges according to the law. In the future, you must be even more careful in your actions. Do not lose my face. It was rare to find such an opportunity to smooth things over.
Of course, the wise emperor would not let it go.
He waved his hand to stop Fan Xian's request.
The eunuch understood and loudly announced the end of the court meeting.
Fan Xian sighed in his heart.
He knew that the emperor could not appear to be too biased toward him in this matter.
He was still not satisfied, but the officials had already deeply felt the emperor's intention to protect the boy from the Fan family. As the officials retreated from Taiji Palace, they all came up to him to express their consolation. At this moment, the officials seemed to have become the imperial censorate's enemies, and they all disparaged the other side into a mess. Fan Xian smiled bitterly in response to each of them.
He glanced at his father, who was hunched over and walking toward the square in a very old manner.
His heart jumped, and he quickly went forward to support him. The officials looked at the father and son from behind and couldn't help but repeatedly praise them. Father and son were officials in the same court. The scene of the father being kind and the son being filial appeared in the palace. It was truly a story to be told. Minister Fan felt his arm tighten.
He turned his head to see that it was his son who had come to support him.
He couldn't help but smile bitterly and sigh. Anji, why can't you be a little more obedient? Fan Xian was also full of grievances. Who would have thought that Xinyang would always be watching him like a ghost?
When they were about to reach the palace gate, a young eunuch quietly ran over and passed on the emperor's oral orders.
He then pulled Fan Xian along as he jogged toward the back of the palace. Minister Fan looked at his son's back with a complicated expression.
He suddenly felt that although the boy had always pretended to be calm and steady, when he jogged, he still showed the carefree nature in his bones.
It was not quite in line with the solemn and oppressive atmosphere of the palace. A colleague came from behind. Minister Fan's eyes immediately became as calm as an ancient well. He smiled slightly and walked out of the royal palace with the officials. The rain had stopped a long time ago, but the empty ground in front of the palace was still soaked in water. The imperial censorates were already drenched, but they still stubbornly knelt on the wet ground. The furious imperial censor of the left had left court and also knelt in front of those people. He even took off his black gauze hat and held it to his left chest. Seeing this scene, the officials finally knew that the matter was not over. Xu the scholar went up to comfort them, but seeing that it had no effect, he shook his head and left. Most of the officials hurried back to their mansions in their carriages.
They knew that this matter would only grow bigger, and it was safer for them to hide far away.
Only Minister Fan stood in front of this group of people for a moment.
He then ordered the guards in his manner to bring umbrellas for the imperial censors and waited to the side.
No one knew if it would rain later. Led by a young eunuch, Fan Xian jogged through a few palace walls and arrived outside the royal study. The young eunuch was already panting from exhaustion. Fan Xian thought for a moment and circulated his Xueqi, causing his complexion to become a little rosier. He entered the emperor's royal study uneasily.
Following the young eunuch's directions, he carefully stood beside the emperor's soft couch.
After a while, a curtain at the side of the study moved slightly. The emperor, who had changed into regular clothes, walked in.
Seeing Fan Xian's calm expression and a glimmer of excitement in his eyes, the emperor waved his hand, indicating that he should not stand on ceremony.
Fan Xian was truly shameless and did not kneel in greeting. He accepted the embroidered stool that the young eunuch brought over and sat down obediently.
Today's royal study was much quieter than it had been that day. Only he and the emperor were left, so the situation was a little strange.
Fan Xian's expression was calm, but his heart was a little nervous. This was because a guess was only a guess. Although Chen Pingping's words and the many details of this life had long since confirmed this guess, if the emperor really did make this guess clear, what would he do?
Just as Fan Xian felt that the emperor was getting ready to put on the mask of a kind father, he was woken up by what the emperor said next.
Fan Xian, you do not lack money. Why are you greedy for it?
The emperor looked at him coldly and asked directly.
A drop of cold sweat dripped from Fan Xian's forehead.
He knew that he had indeed overestimated himself. He also knew that the matter of him receiving banknotes through Lady Lu could not be hidden from the emperor in front of him. He stood up and said very seriously, "Long live.
Because I am in charge of the first bureau of the Overwatch Council, I need to receive banknotes."
The emperor seemed to be a little curious about what he was going to say next.
To truly supervise officials, one must first blend into the bureaucracy, like how the first bureau of the Overwatch Council used to be cold and unapproachable. Although one can rely on a large network of spies to effectively supervise the officials in the capital, it is like looking at flowers in the fog. One can never see clearly. As for the most important transactions in the capital's bureaucracy, one can never be sure. Fan Xian carefully explained, to supervise officials, one must become an official yourself.
He smiled bitterly and continued, "Long live your majesty also knows that I have lived in Danzhou for a long time." As he said this, he lowered his head, but when the emperor heard this, he could feel a slight reaction.
After entering the capital, the changes have been too great. At the beginning, I was only a literary official. Now, I have to take over the Overwatch Council, which is such a heavy responsibility. I feel uneasy, and I often think that there is a layer of estrangement between me and the officials. It is difficult to blend into the court.
Without waiting for him to continue, the emperor understood what he meant. He waved his hand and coldly said, "If you really are a white crane, even if you use ink to dye yourself black, you cannot fool those crows."
These methods are truly childish. As long as you are loyal to the country, who would dare to make things difficult for you? Don't forget Xueqi's example. At first, that bastard wanted to plunge into the bureaucracy of the capital.
Unexpectedly, he plunged headfirst into it and was unable to rise again.
Fan Xian knew that the emperor was repeatedly warning him to be a lonely official. He felt a bit disgusted, but his face did not change.
He only chuckled and said, "Long live your majesty. Today, someone in court is making things difficult for me." To the side, the eunuch holding the horsetail whisk felt his heart tremble.
Sir Fan Jr.'s words did not match his status. It seemed to be a bit arrogant because of his favor.
No matter how much the emperor liked this young official, he was afraid that he would lose his temper. Even the crown prince was respectful in front of the emperor with a glimmer of fear.
Who would speak like Fan Xian?
Unexpectedly, the emperor glanced at Fan Xian with a slight smile and said, "I do want to give you justice.
However, this is a matter between you and your family's elders. I don't want to meddle too much." Fan Xian was shocked.
He knew that the emperor completely understood that the background of the imperial censorate's letter was related to Xinjiang, but why did he still suppress him and not let him act?
He was truly unwilling.
He was about to give the emperor some more eye drops when he suddenly saw the emperor rub the space between his brows and faintly say, "I have a portrait for you to see."
Countless thoughts surged through Fan Xian's mind. He thought of what Chen Pingping had said. The only portrait his mother had left behind was in the royal palace. At this moment, the door to the royal study was pushed open. Eunuch Ho, who was familiar with Fan Xian, walked in with a face full of anxiety.
He quietly said something to the emperor.
Fan Xian's hearing was exceptional and had heard it clearly. He couldn't help but feel shocked. He thought to himself that the Imperial Censorate had invested too much this time.
As expected, the emperor's expression gradually darkened. Glancing at Fan Xian, he waved his hand and said, "Kneeling at the palace gates and taking off the black veil?
This is remonstrating me for being muddle-headed. Then, I will show them how muddle-headed I am. Pass on my edict."
The Imperial Censorate has corrupted court officials, recklessly interfered with council matters, neglected state affairs, did not repent, and acted rashly.
30 strokes of the cane. This was the first time Fan Xian had seen the emperor angry. He couldn't help but feel a chill. 30 strokes of the cane. If the Imperial Censorate didn't die, they would lose half their lives. In reality, these Imperial Censorate's luck was too bad. Just as the Qing Emperor was preparing to do something important, he was interrupted by them. How could he forgive them?
Outside the Shenhua Gate, beside the Jade River, in front of the arch bridge, on the wet stone slabs, a few Imperial Censorates had their official robes stripped and were pressed to the ground to be beaten.
The cane fell heavily and was slowly raised. Each time it rose and fell, it brought with it a few drops of blood and rain. The scene was bloody. At this time, some of the civil officials who had heard the news had hurried back.
Seeing this wretched scene, they rushed into the palace to admonish the emperor.
Looking at Fan Xian, who had been sent to the palace gates to observe the punishment, they couldn't help but feel a trace of fear in their eyes. Although today's matter was caused by the Imperial Censorate's people, the emperor had actually used the cane, which had been suspended for many years, for Fan Xian's sake. They couldn't help but have a clearer understanding of Fan Xian's position in the emperor's heart. Fan Xian stood beside Eunuch Ho and narrowed his eyes as he watched the scene in front of him. He didn't have a trace of sympathy for the Imperial Censorate, but his face showed that he couldn't bear it. He said, "Eunuch Ho, tell your subordinates to go easy on them."
Eunuch Ho lowered his eyes and said, "Sir Fan, you have a good heart."
"You already told me earlier, and I didn't dare to disobey. I've already told you that although they are being beaten badly, they haven't hurt their muscles or bones." Fan Xian's gaze swept down and saw that the eunuch's feet were spread out.
He knew that this was the secret signal for beating with all your heart.
He sighed slightly and no longer cared about the matter.
Not far from the two of them, the Imperial Censor of the left, who had been spared by the emperor, fell to the ground with a pale face.
Although he hadn't been caned, he felt that the punishment that had fallen on his subordinates was like a slap to his face. The servants left behind by Fan Xian's father had a look of disdain on their faces.
Holding an umbrella in their hands, they looked at the dazed Imperial Censor of the left.
Fan Xian walked over and waved his hand to disperse the servants.
With a trace of pity, he looked at Imperial Censor Lai and said, "Why did you have to get involved in this matter?"
Imperial Censor Lai didn't know how much inside information Fan Xian knew. He stood where he was. Fan Xian sighed and desperately begged Eunuch Ho to temporarily stop the caning and enter the palace alone to plead with the emperor. It wasn't that he couldn't bear to see blood, nor did he want to spare these Imperial censors who dared to provoke him. It was just that he had to do this in front of the hundreds of court officials who couldn't bear it.
As Fan Xian ran toward the palace, he thought bitterly to himself, "You, the emperor, want to use this caning to push me against all the other officials.
I won't let it happen. I've worked so hard to build up my good character for 2 years. If it's all gone because of a few caning strikes, I'll lose a lot." Chapter 276.
In the darkness of the carriage, the young man had a faint smile on his lips.
It was a smile that he did not want to show. There was a hint of shyness that a man should not have. His lightly spread eyebrows were like the murals in the temples of Qing, giving off a natural feeling of antiquity and nobility.
"I don't understand." There was a hint of distress in the young man's smile.
"I don't understand many things. For example, why did he investigate me? Does he not know that I truly admire him?" His fingers gently pinched the sachet at his waist. He sniffed the scent of lilacs that was slowly spreading out.
He gently leaned his head against the soft wall of the carriage and half closed his eyes.
"It is natural for me to admire him. Father is used to the life of a horse. Why does he value his literary name so much?" No one dared to respond to him. No one had the ability to respond to him. So the young nobleman was still trapped in that absurd sense of unreality. Why? Why? The bashful smile on his face gradually disappeared.
He gently removed his fingers from the sachet and rubbed them against the tip of his nose, as if trying to preserve all the remaining fragrance on his fingertips.
This doesn't make sense.
But there's nothing I can do.
The young man sighed.
He turned his head to look at the bunch of green grapes beside him.
Suddenly, he reached out and grabbed the grape by its stem. He expressionlessly threw the grapes away. Father loves him too much.
More than he loves me.
The corners of his mouth twitched nervously. He thought of the crown prince in the palace and his aunt in Xinjiang.
He waved his hand and said to the bowing censor beside him, "Sue for peace."
Censor He Zongwei did not participate in this operation.
He raised his head in surprise and saw a flash of weariness in the second prince's eyes.
He did not speak for a while.
The imperial censorate's imperial censor had been beaten until his flesh and bones were separated and his blood was dripping.
This matter naturally became the most sensational news in Jingdo recently.
The newly published newspaper in the palace lightly described the situation at the time, and the internal court bulletin of the government wrote it clearly. Everyone knew that through this incident, the emperor had once again emphasized the authority of the Overwatch Council. Even more obviously, he had once again emphasized his desire to protect the young man called Fan Xian. There was a seat in the royal study, and there was a seat in the Overwatch Council. If the imperial censor were to accuse him, it would mean that the emperor was giving him face.
Fan Xian. This was already a dazzling name. Now, on top of the golden content, there was an additional thick black and gray border. Most officials did not dare to look directly at him.
On the day the imperial censor was beaten, it was rumored that the young commissioner had knelt outside the royal study and begged the emperor to stop the punishment.
The imperial censor was able to live because he had disregarded his former enmity and begged for mercy.
At the time, Eunuch Ho, who had carried out the punishment, had casually revealed that the reason he had not beaten the imperial censor to death with 3 strikes was because of Commissioner Fan's secret request.
On the surface, Fan Xian did not turn this matter into a favor to the imperial censorate.
He maintained his silence on the matter of the cane.
On the contrary, it was this attitude that allowed him to gain more understanding and support. After all, he had kept the lives of those pitiful imperial censors. The Jingdo scholars and imperial college students, who had secretly stood on his side, felt that they had not supported the wrong person. The people of the Qing kingdom had always thought the Overwatch Council was the emperor's dog. It was not until this matter, perhaps because Fan Xian's reputation as an immortal poet was too dazzling, that people began to learn to face this organization that had always been hidden in the dark. Their impression of the Overwatch Council, or at least the First Bureau, began to gradually change. There was a possibility of transition between black and white. Within the camp of good and evil, there was also a different kind of beauty. Gray silence. This was the Overwatch Council. There were still a few more days before the chrysanthemum viewing party in the royal palace. Fan Xian sat in his courtyard with his head half tilted, guessing what exactly Warner was embroidering. At the same time, he wondered what Fan Xija, the little bastard, had been playing these days. Occasionally, he would also wonder if the second prince, who was very similar to him, still had that slightly bashful smile on his lips. When Fan Xian thought of this matter, he was not very happy. Slightly bashful? Naive? This was his trademark. Suddenly discovering that someone more noble than him also had this quality, he began to feel uneasy in the depths of his heart.
"Young master," Tang Zijing respectfully reported, "according to your wishes, Miss Shen has already moved into the garden."
Fan Xian nodded.
"Has she been acting strangely these past few days?" Tang Zijing replied. "Aside from her somewhat gloomy state of mind, there has been nothing out of the ordinary."
Fan Xian nodded and slowly closed his eyes. "Send an invitation for me.
Invite the young and old of the Yen Manor over for a meal." "Should I inform the master?"
Tang Zijing glanced at him and asked carefully.
Fan Xian laughed and said, "Of course. If father knew that he was able to eat at the same table as Yen Ruahai, I'm afraid he would be much happier."
Tang Zijing agreed and couldn't help but say, "That imperial censor He Zongwei has come again." "Young master, are you still not going to meet him today?" Fan Xian opened his eyes. It was unclear what they meant. Of course, he knew He Zongwei. When he had first entered the capital, he had interacted with him at Yisher Tavern. At the time, this great scholar of the capital was attached to the only son of Guayu, Guabaoquan, the Minister of Rights. Yet, he refused to pass up the opportunity to make friends with Fan Xian. He was presumably a scholar who was passionate about power. As for why he had become the imperial censor, Fan Xian was very clear about the hidden reasons. He knew that he had been visiting every day, representing that noble master. Because of Fan Xian, even Li Hongqing was avoiding him. The second prince was probably a little annoyed. See him. Fan Xian waved his hand and stood up. The preparations in the council were almost complete. Seeing him and expressing his attitude was not an undeclared war. After walking around the garden for a long time, Fan Xian felt a little annoyed. When he reached the front residence, he wondered why he had run so fast the night he returned from northern Qi. Perhaps he was really worried that his sister would run away and his wife would make a cuckold of him? As he thought this, he realized that the gravel path between the autumn trees was a little short. He walked into the study of the front residence. The imperial censor, He Zongwei, was already sitting in the room. Seeing Fan Xian arrive, He Zongwei hurriedly stood up and bowed. Master Fan. Fan Xian waved his hand. It's not the first time we've met. There's no need to be so polite. That was true. After last spring, He Zongwei often came to Fan Manor to visit. Perhaps he wanted to walk the same path as the Fan family, but he didn't expect Fan Xian to have already seen through his thoughts about Ruoruo. Plus, he didn't like the man's deeply hidden nature, so he cleanly drew the line between them. After coming a few times and being ignored, He Zongwei retreated. But this famous scholar of the capital was no stranger to the people of Fan Manor. He Zongwei saw that there was no one else in the study. I have come because of a previous matter, he said straightforwardly. A previous matter? Fan Xian only said these two words before closing his mouth. The ends of his brows rose slightly. With a glimmer of interest, he looked at Imperial Censor He Zongwei's face. However, he waved his hand and stopped him from continuing to speak. He Zongwei's face was dark. It was obvious that he came from a poor family when he was young. But these years in the capital, and half a year in the bureaucracy, had made him more mature, and had slightly shed some of the arrogance of a scholar. His eyes were unusually clear, and his face was full of undisguised righteousness. Anyone who saw him would feel that he was amiable. But in Fan Xian's eyes, it was incomparable disdain. What previous matter? Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and asked with a smile. I am not very clear. He Zongwei was indeed worthy of being the second prince's lobbyist. A faint smile appeared on his dark face, a sincere smile that could not be missed. It's nothing, it was a slip of the tongue. I just brought a box of good tea from Mount Yunwu on behalf of the second prince. Fan Xian looked at the seemingly ordinary box in front of him and fell silent. He knew that if he accepted this gift, it would be the same as making up for the incident with the censor a few days ago. From the second prince's point of view, perhaps Fan Xian had not suffered any losses, and had instead gained a great deal of face from the wooden staff in front of the palace walls. He should be willing to let the matter rest. Master He, it was a slip of the tongue. I remember something from before. Fan Xian looked at He Zongwei with a smile. He Zongwei couldn't help but feel his heart tremble. He felt that this young and handsome Master Fan, this young man who, as soon as he entered the capital, had completely stolen all of his glory as a scholar, how could his expression be so similar to the second prince's? What matter are you referring to, master? He Zongwei felt a bit uneasy. Fan Xian looked at him coldly. I left the capital in the spring and went to northern Qi. Unexpectedly, I returned a few months ago and found that things in the capital had changed greatly. Even my father-in-law has been forced to retire. He Zongwei's tongue felt a bit bitter. He couldn't say anything. He knew that the thing he feared the most had finally happened. Fan Xian quietly said, Master He, you should know who Wu Bowen is, right? He Zongwei forced himself to be alert. He is the Prime Minister's strategist. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. Master He, you are indeed a man with an old friendship. This spring, you and Wu Bowen's widow entered the capital together. I wonder where Madame Wu is now? He Zongwei gritted his teeth and stood. He cupped his hands in a salute and begged, Master Fan, that day I was grieved over the death of an old member of the Gua family, so I boldly brought Madame Wu into the capital. Correct, the Prime Minister's downfall is inextricably linked to my actions. However, This matter involves the laws of the Qing kingdom. I dare not conceal it. I hope you can understand. Naturally, he did not have the extravagant hope that Fan Xian would let him go. Relying on the fact that he was now on good terms with the second prince, he stubbornly said, "You can target me as much as you want. However, the second prince is sincere. I hope you will not insist." Fan Xian glanced at him and lightly said, "I am an official of the court. Naturally, I will not target someone. However, I am also just an ordinary person. I will always remember some personal grudges." He Zhongwei glanced at him with hatred in his eyes. He knew that the peace talks today had already become an illusion. Although the Prime Minister's downfall had something to do with him, that was his duty as a subject of the Qing kingdom. So what if he used some tricks? Did the father-son-in-law pair not know how to use tricks?
Thinking of this, he rose and bowed, preparing to leave in a huff.
Fan Xian looked at him with extreme disgust. Suddenly, he did something that did not match his status. He stepped forward and kicked He Zhongwei in the waist. There was a muffled sound, and He Zhongwei fell to the ground in embarrassment. He Zhongwei was, after all, a famous figure in the capital. He was also the imperial censor. He angrily climbed to his feet and pointed at Fan Xian.
You dare hit me."
Fan Xian clenched his fists. "I was kicking you. You came to my manor to ask for a beating. Naturally, I had to satisfy you." He threw a few more punches. Although he did not dare to kill He Zhongwei, he still beat He Zhongwei into a pig's head. He Zhongwei did not dare to stay any longer. Holding his aching head, he remembered that when Fan Xian had made his debut, he had been famous for his dark fists. He quickly scrambled out of the manor. However, as he was leaving the room, he suffered another flying kick from Fan Xian and a dart from a tea box.
Fan Xian looked at the wretched figure of the servant and felt a little better.
He lowered his head and spat. "You tricked my father-in-law, and now you come to my manor to ask for peace. F***ck, if this isn't asking for a beating, then what is?" Tang Zijing flashed over from the side and smiled bitterly.
"Young master, if word of this gets out, I'm afraid it won't look good on the old master."
Fan Xian shrugged. "It's just beating a barking dog. It's all for his master to see." It was said that a few months ago, when Fan Xian was still part of the diplomatic mission heading north, he had received the council's court bulletin. He clearly understood how the prime minister, his father-in-law, had fallen from power.
And with the help of the dead old man Xiao En, his judgment of the matter was even more accurate.
Wu Bowen was a strategist the eldest princess had placed in the prime minister's office. Last summer, he had instigated the second son of the Lin family to join forces with Northern Qi to assassinate Fan Xian on Yolon Street. Unexpectedly, he had died under a grape trellis. Because of this, Wu Bowen's son was also tortured to death by the prime minister's men in Shandong. Fan Xian naturally did not know that this was the doing of Yuan Hongdao, Chen Pingping's deepest spy. Wu Bowen's wife had been arranged to enter the capital by Xinyang. Cleverly, through He Zhongwei, she had moved into the old residence of an old imperial censor, and began to lodge a complaint against the emperor. What really toppled Prime Minister Lin was a very unreasonable murder. On the streets of the capital, an assassin had attempted to assassinate Wu Bowen's wife. It seemed that the Prime Minister's men had wanted to silence her, but she had been saved by the combined efforts of the second prince and Crown Prince Jing. This matter was reported to the palace, and Prime Minister Lin Ruofu had no choice but to accept the deal and dejectedly leave the capital. It was from that report that Fan Xian began to suspect the role the second prince and Crown Prince Jing played in this matter. It was also from that day onwards that he began to think about the true relationship between the second prince and the eldest princess of Xinyang. Every time he saw Dabao, Fan Xian would think of his father-in-law, who had returned home. This was not some official matter of state. It was just a personal grudge between Fan Xian and the second prince. Although Fan Xian must have had more far-reaching plans behind it, at least as the son-in-law, Fan Xian had to take revenge on this matter. Fan Xian rubbed his fists and stretched his muscles. He felt much better. He turned around and returned to the back residence. As he walked, he said to Tang Zijing in a clear voice, "Don't tell father about this. I think that He Zhongwei would be too embarrassed to spread it around." When he arrived at the back residence, Warner was still earnestly embroidering something. Fan Xian looked at his wife, smiled slightly, and walked up to her. He was too embarrassed to spread the news that Xueqi had been beaten, but the second prince still knew about it. He increasingly did not understand what Fan Xian was relying on to be so arrogant. The second prince did not seem to have much power in the court, but in reality, with the help of the eldest princess of Xinjiang, he had already gained the loyalty of many court officials, so he actually did not think much of Fan Xian. But now that he thought about it, this Fan Xian was clearly a great scholar with a scholarly heart and a refined heart.
How did he become such an unreasonable official? Could it be that the Overwatch Council really had such a great influence on a person? But the second prince still believed that Fan Xian was at most caught up in a personal dispute. He did not wish to condescend to see Fan Xian under these circumstances. He assumed that Fan Xian would have calmed down after beating Xueqi, so the second prince only wrote a letter to Xinjiang. He was not too worried. Within the beautiful Li Palace in Xinjiang, a beautiful old tree was slowly and silently plucking its leaves. The yellowish leaves floated among the white gauze curtains. A soft hand reached into the air and gently caught a leaf. The veins on the hand were not very thick, but they faintly moved through the white jade-like skin, like the spirit of jade.
It was very beautiful. Eldest Princess Li Yunrui, who had left the capital for a year, yawned like a young girl. She threw the withered leaf in her hand to the ground, raised her arm to support her chin, and turned her eyes slightly, overflowing with charm.
What do you think, Master Yuan?
Yuan Hongdao, who had betrayed Prime Minister Lin Ruofu and was now working for Xinjiang, was expressionless. However, there was a hint of surprise in his eyes. The second prince is blessed by the heavens. He has underestimated the enemy a little. The eldest princess giggled. That Fan Xian is only a young man. To call him an enemy, Master Yuan is being overly cautious. Yuan Hongdao laughed bitterly. This son-in-law is no ordinary man. Although the matter of Northern Qi was not fully accomplished, and the eldest princess's clever plan was not fully realized, Master Fan was ingenious. His hands were not stained with blood, but he provoked the emperor of Northern Qi to secretly send Shang Shanhu to assassinate Shen Zhong. How can such a man be described as reckless? Besides, the son-in-law is the immortal poet of his generation.
Such a well-spoken but well-intentioned man. His thoughts are many times more complicated than those of an ordinary man.
The eldest princess sighed and slowly rose from the brocade couch. Her luxurious palace robes revealed a large portion of her neck, which was incomparably fair, like a swan's. That kid. Not only did he not save Xiao En, he even sabotaged Shen Zhong in the end. The Cui family is complaining every day, and the position of provost of the Discipline Commission in Northern Qi is still empty. The brocade guards don't dare to make decisions, and for a while, the distribution channels are blocked. The eldest princess's confidant, Huang Yi, who had been standing quietly to the side, respectfully said, "We are currently in discussion with the Empress Dowager of Northern Qi. But the young emperor of Northern Qi has been very stubborn lately, and has stubbornly resisted the Empress Dowager's order to appoint Marquis Ningho as provost of the Discipline Commission." The eldest princess laughed coldly. That old woman of Northern Qi is really an idiot. She could have chosen any unremarkable confidant, but she insisted on having her own brother be the head of the Secret Service. Does she think her own son is stupid? Yuan Hongdao reminded her, "Let's not talk about the matter of Northern Qi for now. I just don't know how things will develop in the capital." Huang Yi had always disliked how he had gained the eldest princess's trust not long after arriving in Xinjiang. Suppressing the faint jealousy in his heart, he said, "After the chaos in the capital for a while, things should calm down. Presumably, His Majesty does not wish for the successor of the Overwatch Council, whom he had personally chosen, to have an irreconcilable conflict with his own son." Yuan Hongdao laughed coldly. "I don't know what His Majesty is thinking, but I do know that Sir Fan Jr. is someone who refuses to be taken advantage of." This time, the Imperial Censorate's Imperial Censors collectively denounced him, originally to remind him that there were some things he could not touch. Who would have thought that His Majesty would favor him so much? Fan Xian's face has been damaged, and naturally, he will find a way to get it back. Huang Yi didn't care about his expression. Do you think that Fan Xian would dare to make a big deal out of this? Only now did the eldest princess smile slightly. What Sir Yuan says makes sense. This time, I shouldn't have rushed the Imperial Censorate to touch that little guy. That little guy's personality is quite stubborn. She suddenly covered her mouth and laughed. Huang Yi, don't say it like that. That son-in-law of mine really likes to make trouble. Fan Jian, that old thing, named his son Nji. Presumably, he had the foresight to know that my son-in-law couldn't stay quiet.
As she covered her mouth and laughed, the Li Palace was suddenly filled with a bright and beautiful color. The liveliness in her eyes and the charm in her brows were like the rain in autumn, moistening every inch of space. It made Huang Yi freeze where he stood, not knowing what to say.
Even Yuan Hongdao couldn't help but be a little absent-minded.
I reckon that my good son-in-law will certainly take a few more bites out of the second prince, the eldest princess said with a smile.
Write a letter and have the second prince sue for peace. No matter how injured he is, he will sue for peace.
Although the words of the most beautiful woman in the Qing kingdom were gentle, no one dared to comment on the power contained within.
Huang Yi wanted to say something but stopped. He couldn't help but shake his head. The eldest princess smiled sweetly. Mother's letter says that she wants me to return to the palace for the new year. Just wait. Wait until I return to the capital. I will have a good time with my son-in-law. In Jingdo, in the embrace of the autumn night, the secret agents of the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council began to move. The director of the Imperial Astronomer was an unremarkable position. However, at special times, such as when a meteor fell or Yu was eaten by a dog, he was responsible for explaining things to the emperor. His explanations sometimes had serious consequences. He was the second prince's man. However, before he had time to show his usefulness, he had been captured by the most famous black dogs in the Qing kingdom.
On the long street, with a whooshing sound, a dozen black-clothed men, like demons of the night, jumped directly into the manor of the director of the Imperial Astronomer. By the time the guards reacted, their master had already been tied up like a rice dumpling by these black-clothed men.
However, these bandits did not leave. On the contrary, they lit up the lights in the courtyard.
Under the light of the courtyard, the guards, who were armed with martial arts, looked at the black-clothed men's clothes and did not dare to make a move. Mu Tai, dressed in black and personally leading the way, looked coldly at the miscellaneous people present and the family of the director of the Imperial Astronomer.
Enunciating each word, he said, "The Overwatch Council is handling a case by imperial edict."
After saying this, the officials of the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council dragged the director of the Imperial Astronomer out of the manor and stuffed him into a carriage.
In a moment, they disappeared into the pitch-black night.
A wail suddenly rang out in the director's manor, and the lights gradually went out.
Chapter 277. In the autumn of the 5th year of the Qing calendar, the palace eunuch Hong Zhu carried a thick stack of documents. Half bent, he jogged toward the room in the west corner of the door. The tips of his seemingly small feet stepped on the slightly wet ground without any hesitation. The hem of the light blue robe he wore had been lifted to prevent him from tripping over it. His right hand was placed horizontally on the stack of documents. The wide sleeve covered the documents tightly, terrified that the lead-like heavy clouds in the sky would squeeze out a few drops of rain and wet these documents. Stepping over the threshold, he went through the procedures of taking over the documents. He exchanged names with the eunuchs in the room. Only then did Hong Zhu relax. He carefully signed his name on the form and handed over the documents in his clothes. The Hall of Governmental Affairs was the central place where the Qing kingdom handled court politics. In the past, its position was not as important as it was today because there was still a prime minister in charge of the 6 ministries. All memorials had to be read by the prime minister before they could enter the palace to ask for an edict. Now that the powerful prime minister Lin Ruofu had quietly returned home, the position of the Hall of Governmental Affairs immediately became apparent. The emperor had brought up a few old officials to discuss matters in the Hall of Governmental Affairs. He had placed the place of discussion outside the corner of the royal palace to make it easier to communicate. Presently, the people in charge of court affairs in the Hall of Governmental Affairs were Xu the scholar and a few old officials. The slightly cold autumn wind blew in from the square in front of the palace. Hong Zhu rubbed his hands and let out a breath. He stood quietly outside the door, waiting for the old officials' replies. At this time, he could not leave. He stood obediently outside the door and pricked up his ears to listen to the movements inside. Occasionally, an official would walk past him and politely nod his head in greeting. Hong Zhu knew his identity and quickly smiled and bowed. However, no one thought it was strange for him to stay outside the Hall of Governmental Affairs temporary study hall because they all knew this little eunuch's job. Occasionally,
Some of the little eunuchs sent out by the palace to serve the elders would see him and respectfully bow to him, inviting him to the side room to hide from the cold.
Hong Zhu did not have much etiquette toward these little eunuchs.
He nodded his head proudly and continued to stand guard outside the door. He was only 16 years old this year, but he had such a small status in the imperial palace. The reason was that his daily work was an extremely important part of the imperial palace. More importantly, his surname was Hong, so there had always been rumors in the imperial palace that he might be a relative of eunuch Hong.
Hong Zhu rubbed the little fire lump growing on the left side of his lower lip. He was a bit angry. These few days, the Overwatch Council had been arresting people fiercely. The memorials from the civil officials were fiercely. The arguments in the Hall of Governmental Affairs were fiercely. He had been running around in and out of the palace a few times a day. He was so busy that he pissed his pants. The anger in his body was too strong, and it had rushed out. He thought that when he returned to the palace, he would definitely go to the small kitchen and ask for a bowl of herbal tea to drink. The discussion inside the door wasn't very loud, but it still reached his ears. This is a matter of the Overwatch Council. I don't know why His Majesty has returned the memorial. Perhaps.
The voice that followed was hesitant.
Is it because His Majesty feels that Commissioner Fan has gone too far recently? An old official's angry voice rang out. How is it just going overboard? He, Fan Xian, is clearly using the power in his hands to strike down dissidents. In a short 10 days, he has arrested 5 officials and entered the Overwatch Council in the middle of the night to kidnap people. How is this like the Overwatch Council of the court? They are practically bandits in his hands. Another disapproving voice rang out. Commissioner Fan does things openly and honorably. After these 5 officials were arrested, the next day, a detailed list of their crimes was posted on the wall outside the Supreme Court. The people of Jingdo all know. I think Sir Yan's words are a bit excessive. The first bureau of the Overwatch Council does such things as supervising the governance of officials. What does it have to do with striking down dissidents? I think it is because those 5 officials did not handle matters properly that there is such trouble. The old official surnamed Yen said angrily, not striking down dissidents? Then why did the Overwatch Council suddenly make so many moves after the Imperial Censorate reported him last time?
That person smiled coldly and said, if it was a strike for revenge, why did Sir Fan Jr. not make a move against the Imperial Censorate? That is because His Majesty is wise and strictly forbids the Overwatch Council from participating in the Imperial Censorate's affairs. That person's cold laugh appeared even more disdainful. Then dare I ask Minister Yen, what is the relationship between the Imperial Censorate and the Imperial Censorate? If Fan Xian wanted revenge, why did he arrest the director of the Imperial Censorate? The Minister of Appointments Yen Hongshu's words were cold for a moment. After a moment he said in a cold voice, no matter what, we can't let the Overwatch Council make matters worse. If they continue to arrest people like this, will they have to arrest all the officials of the court? That person said mockingly. You can rest assured, Minister. The Overwatch Council does not have the power to act against officials of the 3rd rank and above. The hidden meaning in these words was a bit sinister, implying that the Minister of Appointments was not upright, which was why he was so angry at the Overwatch Council's investigation. However, there was a limit to the Overwatch Council's power. Officials of the 3rd rank and above could not be touched. Yen Hongshu's angry voice immediately reached the ears of the young eunuch Hong Zhu outside the door. How absurd! Are you going to watch the Overwatch Council grow from now on? The person who had spoken first began to act as a mediator. Warmly he said, don't be angry, Minister. Xueqi, don't say anything else. The Overwatch Council can only investigate cases. Unless specifically approved by the Emperor, they cannot judge cases. These officials... He coughed and said, whether they are guilty or not will be decided after the Supreme Court has examined them. It's just that His Majesty's intention is very clear. The few of us must have an opinion. The person called Xueqi rushed to say, council affairs are matters the Emperor personally manages. As an official, I dare not comment too much. Minister Yen said angrily, I think this trend cannot be allowed to continue. If Fan Xian is allowed to do as he pleases, do you all really want the Qing court to produce another Chen Pingping? Hong Zhu, who was standing guard outside the door, stood on his tiptoes and clearly heard the conversation inside. A cold smile rose to the corners of his lips. He thought to himself, the relationship between the emperor and Director Chan is not something you civil officials can compare to. Just as he was thinking this, he saw the advisor of the Bureau of Military Affairs, Qin Heng, push open the door with a cold smile on his face. He quickly went forward to curry favor and said, "Sir Qin, I am in a hurry to return to the palace."
When can I get it? Qin Heng was over 30 years old. He was the biological son of the Bureau of Military Affairs, General Qin.
Last year, during the war against Northern Qi, he had been the commander of the Qing army at the time.
Given his seniority, it was not enough for him to enter the Hall of Governmental Affairs to discuss matters. However, after the last strike, General Qin had claimed illness and did not appear in court. The emperor had specially ordered Qin Heng to enter the Hall of Governmental Affairs to discuss matters. It could be considered a generous gift to the Qin family. It also showed that the Qin kingdom still attached great importance to military service. General Qin of the Bureau of Military Affairs claimed illness and did not appear in court. Originally, the officials thought it was because the Qin family could not bear to see the commissioner of the Overwatch Council Fan Xian's popular arrogance in court. However, Hong Zhu heard Qin Heng defend Fan Xian at every turn, and he couldn't help but have some misgivings.
Qin Heng glanced at the little eunuch and smiled.
Let them argue all they want. In the end, no one will dare to go against the emperor's will. You don't keep eavesdropping. In any case, even if you were given 18 guts, you wouldn't dare to take it as a joke to others. Why bother keeping it to yourself? Hong Zhu lowered his eyes and smiled. He watched as the most popular military figure in court disappeared into the entrance of the guest room. He shook his head in confusion. Before long, the Hall of Governmental Affairs discussion, or rather argument, finally ended under the mediation of Xu the scholar. The various officials tactfully wrote down their opinions on the documents, asking the emperor to be more careful about this matter. After all, although the 5 officials who had fallen from their horses were not of high rank, they were all old people in the capital. As the saying went, all things grieved for their own kind. These civil officials did not want to see the Overwatch Council pull them down so easily. Thus, Hong Zhu carried the documents again and lifted his light blue palace robes to his waist. Using his sleeves to cover the documents, he stood on his tiptoes, arched his buttocks, and jogged toward the palace. From the temporary residence of the Hall of Governmental Affairs to the royal study in the palace, it was all under the clouds. In everyone's eyes, under the protection of the palace guards, there was no need to worry that someone would harm the Qing kingdom's most important documents. Hong Zhu was particularly pleased as he ran. Along the way, there were a few serving girls who greeted him with affectionate and gentle voices, but he had no time to pay attention to them. He also ignored the fawning gazes of the little eunuchs. Running outside the royal study, Hong Zhu calmed his breathing and pushed open the door with his eyes lowered. He carefully and gently placed the documents under the desk. The emperor, who had been frowning as he read the memorials from the south, picked one up and read it. His frown grew tighter. His thin lips suddenly opened and he said in a cold voice, "These mediocre people. Xu Wu only knows how to laugh. Yan Hangshu, on the other hand, has some guts. The boy from the Qin family is not bad." Hong Zhu did not dare listen to these thunderous words of the emperor. He stood silently to the side, his heart very nervous. The emperor waved his hand. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted from Hong Zhu's shoulders and he left the royal study. Today's matter was over. He followed the cobblestone path and made a few turns before coming to the side of Taiji Palace. In that side room, a few eunuchs were cracking melon seeds and playing. Seeing him come, they quickly invited him to take a seat and asked with a smile, "What's so strange about today?" Hong Zhu's face carried impatience as he said, "Isn't it just listening to those elders quarrel every day? What's so new about it?" These eunuchs quickly flattered him. Eunuch Hong goes back and forth between the royal study and the Hall of Governmental Affairs every day. The important matters of the Qing court are all happening under your eyes, so naturally, you don't find it new. Another one joined in the fun and said, "Of course, if you want to talk about the vital parts of the Qing court, they are all held in Eunuch Hong's arms." No matter how proud Hong Zhu was, he still had a bit of wariness. He quickly put on a serious expression and said, "What nonsense are you saying? I am nothing more than a servant." The eunuch chuckled and said, "Other than the emperor, all of the Qing officials and gentry are servants. Eunuch Hong, you don't know, but your name has spread far and wide. Even when I am outside buying cloth for the palace, when others hear that I am on good terms with you, they all look at me in a different light. Everyone says that in Jingdo, other than Sir Fan Jr. in the minister's manor, there is only you, Eunuch Hong. Hong Zhu stretched out his hand and smoothed the strand of hair on his forehead. He smiled and didn't say anything.
Although he knew that he and the world-shaking Sir Fan Jr. were not on the same level, everyone loved to hear flattery, particularly when he was mentioned in the same breath as that person.
It was hard not to feel proud in his heart. Just at that moment, a shadow walked past the door of the side hall. The eunuchs quickly shut their mouths. Hong Zhu's heart also trembled. He saw clearly that it was Eunuch Dai of Lady Shu's palace. Although he had accepted the task of holding documents, in terms of rank, he was far from Eunuch Dai's. Only when Eunuch Dai had walked far away did a young eunuch spit on the ground.
Seeming to feel that the silence just now was somewhat degrading, he hatefully said, "This Eunuch Dai is no longer the same as he was in the past."
Fortunately, I didn't come to my senses earlier. Why should we pay attention to him when he is in such dire straits? Hong Zhu's heart jumped and he asked, "What happened to Eunuch Dai?" The young eunuch's eyebrows danced as he said, "A few days ago, the imperial censor accused Sir Fan Jr. and pulled out Eunuch Dai. Although in the end, the emperor beat the imperial censor with a rod, Eunuch Dai was also punished.
Now I hear that not only has the emperor taken away Eunuch Dai's task of announcing imperial edicts, but even Lady Shu is preparing to kick him out of the palace." To the side, another person said to Hong Zhu in a fawning manner, "Back when Eunuch Dai was popular, he beat and scolded us of the lower ranks. Now that he has lost power, who would want to pay attention to him? He is like an autumn leaf that has fallen into the mud. How can he compare to a fresh branch like Eunuch Hong?" Hong Zhu listened to these fawning words that were becoming more and more unbearable and vulgar. He furrowed his brows and casually said a few words before quickly walking out of the side hall. He hurried along the palace's giant pillars and finally saw Eunuch Dai's somewhat dispirited figure in front of the stone door leading into the rear palace. He quickly ran forward and said in a fawning manner, "Eunuch Dai, I saw you from afar. I quickly came to pay my respects." Eunuch Dai glanced at him with surprise. Recently, it was rare for the little bastards in the palace to be as courteous as this person. He knew that Hong Zhu had been working in the royal study and was gradually becoming popular, so he found it increasingly strange. Hong Zhu did not say what was going on. He only skillfully fed each word of compliment to the other's heart, making Eunuch Dai very happy. Only then did they part. Watching Eunuch Dai disappear into the depths of the rear palace, the young Hong Zhu revealed a pleased smile at the corners of his lips. Everyone else thought that Eunuch Dai would lose power, but Hong Zhu did not think so. Since Eunuch Dai had connections to Sir Fan Jr. outside the palace, he would certainly stand up again. Hong Zhu, this young eunuch, did not have much confidence in Eunuch Dai, but he had incomparable confidence in Commissioner Fan. Recently, he had been able to hear the discussions between the royal study and the Hall of Governmental Affairs every day. He knew just how popular Sir Fan Jr. was. The first bureau of the Overwatch Council had arrested 5 officials within 10 days. The emperor had maintained a neutral stance. No matter how strong the opinions of the Hall of Governmental Affairs were or how strong the backlash was, they were unable to touch Commissioner Fan at all. 10 days and 5 officials. Although they were all third-level and below officials, as a eunuch deep in the palace, Hong Zhu knew very well what kind of boldness Sir Fan Jr. needed to make such a big ruckus. He also knew what kind of backer stood behind him. He was often in the royal study and knew very well that this backer was the Emperor of Qing Kingdom. Hong Zhu touched the acne by the side of his lips that was about to burst out. He was incomparably envious of the Sir Fan Jr. outside the palace who was the center of attention. They were both young people. How could the difference in their lives be so great? If he could use Eunuch Dai's connection to attach himself to Sir Fan Jr.'s side, that would be wonderful. The fall of the Imperial Astronomer, Ministry of Appointments, and 5 officials in a row caused the darkness of the Overwatch Council to once again envelop Jingdo. However, the people of Jingdo did not care much about these things. In any case, the unlucky ones were all officials. What did it have to do with them? In officialdom, the evaluation of the first bureau of the Overwatch Council leaned toward the negative side. Other than feeling that it hurt its own kind, there was more that it did not understand.
No official could understand why the young Commissioner Fan would make a move against these seemingly unremarkable officials. Other than a very small number of people, no one knew that these fallen officials were all important pawns in the second prince's secret system. Many people thought Fan Xian was taking revenge. He was angry at the imperial censor's collective complaints.
However, he was hindered by the emperor's strict edict and could not act against the imperial censorate.
Thus, like a rash man who had been provoked, he held a seven-catty butcher's knife and roared on the long street. He cut down anyone he met, particularly young children who had no power to protect themselves, to vent the gloom in his heart. However, Commissioner Fan Xian, from his behavior in the past 2 years in the capital, should not be such an impulsive and brainless person. Fan Xian sat in Xinfeng restaurant with a smile.
In his right hand, he held a pair of chopsticks and stirred the red noodles, which were covered in meat sauce and tempting saliva.
In his left hand, he held the case files that Mu Tai had presented to him. These cases had been investigated very quickly. He had prepared well, and the First Bureau's evidence was very solid. It seemed that even if he were to send them to the Supreme Court or the Ministry of Justice, there would be no problem. Before he began this operation, of course, he had first asked his father and the old cripple. The 2 old foxes had expressed their silence, and so Fan Xian knew their attitude. This was something that had to be done. He had to make the second prince feel pain. He had to make him more cautious when listening to Xinyang in the future. At the same time, it would save him some trouble. However, the second prince's reaction surprised Fan Xian. After He Zhongwei had been chased out of the manor, he did not send anyone else to ask for peace. Presumably, the prince's dignity and self-restraint made him stop any further contact. However, the other party also did not launch a counterattack. There was something strange about this matter. What kind of place is Wangyue restaurant? Fan Xian asked curiously. An obscene expression appeared on Mu Tai's face. Fan Xian laughed and scolded him. You are so old. Be a good boy and go home to your grandchildren. Don't keep thinking about such things. Mu Tai's face was bitter. Although Wangyue restaurant is a brothel, it is one of the newest establishments in the capital this year. The First Bureau secretly investigated and found that there must be an important figure behind this place. Recently, there has been a lot of activity there. It seems that someone is secretly planning something. Fan Xian had no interest in brothels. Lujing River was under the influence of Li Hongqing, the heir of King Jing. Although he was secretly fighting with the second prince, he did not want to have a falling out with Li Hongqing. They were friends, and who knew what would happen in the future? But he was very interested in what Mu Tai had to say. An important figure? How important?
Mu Tai thought for a moment and then said, This brothel has an evil air to it.
It's very daring, and it does all sorts of evil things. Within a few months, it has forced a number of women to their deaths. Seeing Yin Mo's silent attitude, I'm afraid the person behind it must be a prince. Fan Xian was silent. He did not know whether it was the crown prince or the second prince who was behind Wangyue restaurant. The great prince only liked to compete with people in the military, and His Majesty rewarded him generously. For the time being, he had no need for money. Under these circumstances, he could not afford to offend everyone at once. Thinking that the second prince was more likely, Fan Xian felt a bit more at ease. He said to Mu Tai, Find some time to investigate. If it is as you say, that this high-class brothel is used by the great prince to contact the officials in the capital, then send a few people in. Mu Tai shook his head. That place is tightly controlled, and it is newly opened. It will be difficult to get in. Also, the Overwatch Council only monitors the officials. They can't do anything to the merchants and the common folk. Fan Xian looked at him angrily. The council may not be able to control the prostitutes, but it can control the yamen that controls them. In any case, keep a close eye on it. There was something he did not say to Mu Tai-ming. The second prince was too modest and quiet. Fan Xian always felt that he was holding on to a trump card, waiting to play it out at some point. After taking care of business, he did not return to the manor. Instead, with a headache, he sat in a carriage and went directly to King Jing's manor. Today, the entire Fan family was at King Jing's manor. For King Jing's birthday, he had not invited any guests. He had only invited Minister Fan's family. This kind of affection and care was right there. No matter how much Fan Xian did not want to see Li Hongqing, He had to make this trip. Walking into the manor, the first thing Fan Xian thought of was that a year and a half ago, he had once recited Lao Du's poem by the lake in the manor.
After that, there had been the banquet, Zhuang Mohan vomiting blood, and Northern Chi's gift of a book. All these things seemed to have started in this quiet and noble manner before him.
Fan Xian suddenly thought of the carriage full of precious books. After he had given them to the Imperial College, he had never had a chance to look at them. As he was thinking, Li Hongqing came to greet him. In his hand was a bowl of sour juice from outside the manor. Fan Xian sighed to himself. He took the bowl and drank it. "You know I like the taste outside your manor," he said with a smile. The first time he had come to King Jing's manor, he had fainted and almost vomited. A bowl of sour juice had helped him recover. Crown Prince Li Hongqing looked into his eyes and shook his head. "Now that you have the power of supervision, you can arrest whoever you want. Why don't you take the sour juice peddler outside my manor and bring him back to your house?" Fan Xian heard the sharpness in his words. He laughed bitterly. "I knew I couldn't escape today. When you brought me a bowl of sour juice, I thought it was strange. I thought you'd hit me with your fist." Li Hongqing snorted and walked side by side with him into the manor. "So you know I'm not happy?" He looked at Fan Xian and said hatefully, "It's not just me who doesn't understand. The second prince doesn't understand either. Since you are not one of the crown prince's people, why do you care about these things?" Fan Xian shook his head and laughed bitterly. "Do you think I like to go around offending people? Or is it that person who forces me?" Having said this, he pointed at the heavy autumn clouds in the sky. His fingers were straight, and he felt helpless. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.